Copyright Irresistibly Played Copyright 2019. This book is a work of fiction. The names, characters, places, and incidents are the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemble to actual events, business establishments, locales, or persons, living or dead, is entirely coincidental. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of both the copyright owner and the publisher. The only exception is brief quotations in printed reviews. The scanning, uploading, and distribution of this book via the internet or via any other means without the permission of the publisher is illegal and punishable by law. Please purchase only authorized electronic editions and do not participate in or encourage electronic piracy of copyrighted materials. Your support of authors' rights is appreciated. Published in the United States of America. Copyright 2019. Victoria Pinder Love in a Book. All rights reserved. Chapter 1. Caitlyn Cooper-Bentley checked her phone app displaying Ava Bentley's vitals and then placed the phone in the pocket of her pale green cotton dress. The flowing fabric made her feel pretty as she worked around the condo. Now that her patient was cancer-free, Caitlyn was calmer about her position as Roy Bentley's wife. She hummed as she made herself and her husband a sandwich from last night's leftover chicken. The juicy meat mixed perfectly with fresh avocado between slices of toasted brown bread. The Italian marble easily wiped clean when she brushed for crumbs after cutting the sandwiches. Like magic, Caitlyn opened the refrigerator that was always filled with whatever she wanted. A song played in her heart that she couldn't quite remember, but it didn't matter. Not really. Life as a Bentley definitely had perks. It was much easier than working an odd schedule, and sometimes 48 hours straight in an ER. She took out a bottle of organic unsweetened iced tea and poured it into 2 glasses to complete their lunch. This was a simple gesture she enjoyed before going upstairs to the daily tea she had with her new friends and sisters-in-law. Everything was pretty good. The ocean outside their condo was a crystal-like blue that stretched as far as her eye could see from the huge bay windows. She set the drinks and sandwiches on a tray to deliver Roy's meal to his office, and then she'd head outside to eat while reading her book. The only drawback was that her husband hated her, and she wasn't sure what to do about it. That if she could survive years of being ignored at her parents' home, she could settle into being ignored in her marriage too. At least she had a yummy lunch, and hopefully her book would be good enough to let her escape her problems for a few hours. She opened the office door and swung it wide with her hip. Without a word to interrupt Roy's phone conversation on the balcony, she placed the tray on his desk and set his sandwich in front of his keyboard. Very aware of her 6'2" husband and how well he filled out his tailored business suit, Caitlyn felt the urge to hurry when he suddenly ended his call. Life as a Bentley wasn't as horrible as a per diem nurse, which had no perks other than a paltry paycheck. And here, she wasn't constantly worried about her best friend being taken advantage of like she spent last year. Now everything was calm. She continued to hum that mysterious tune until Roy, closer to her than she'd realized, said in his deep voice, "Thanks, no problem." Caitlyn's pulse spiked and her voice pitched higher than normal. She met his hazel eyes that lately had haunted her, even in her sleep. Then she turned on her heels and quickly escaped. The moment she closed the door, her mind dinged. She had left her own sandwich on his desk. The attraction she had toward Roy wasn't good. She swallowed and ignored how fast her pulse raced now. He probably thought she was an idiot. The doorbell rang. She checked with security on her phone that gave her the all-clear post. Caitlyn grabbed at the reprieve, happy to put off her humiliation. She answered the knock and a delivery man immediately handed her a legal-sized yellow envelope stuffed with papers she signed for. Once she returned the electronic signature, he asked, "Caitlyn Bentley?" "Yes." For now, she was Roy's wife, in name only. Not that the delivery man needed to know that. He turned to go and she closed the door, reading the obvious. This was for her husband, and from her ex-fiancé. Seeing Harry always reminded her of how she'd almost married a friend. If she'd followed her parents' wishes, she never would have known how the real world worked. After working hard in the trenches, Caitlyn was glad for a second chance at luxury because now she knew the real world wasn't for her. Books and music were better than constant shooting pains in her legs, though, Helping others was why she'd become a nurse. She made her way toward his office to deliver the package. Life could try to bring her down, but she hummed that tune she'd been singing all day and headed in. At least she had something else in hand to grab that sandwich without looking like a complete fool. Roy sat at his desk with his nose stuck in a huge manila folder filled with papers that he highlighted with different colors as some sort of code for himself. She put the envelope down in the middle of his desk and inched the package toward him. "Roy, you have more paperwork that's been delivered. Thanks." He handed her the small tray of food she'd left. "I think this is yours?" Her entire body zipped with awareness while she took her lunch and blinked at how defined his muscles were in his white business shirt. Yes, Caitlyn told herself to stop being silly, and this time it wasn't because she'd been forgetful. Roy Bentley wasn't interested in her. He highlighted the paper with a green marker without looking at her. She knew better. She held the tray as a barrier between them. "Is Harry coming to help you again?" His eyebrow arched. Seriously, his dark brows made his hazel eyes that much more mesmerizing, especially framed with long, thick lashes that she'd always wanted for herself. Men weren't supposed to be as handsome as Roy Bentley. It just wasn't fair. "Yes, is that a problem?" She shook her head fast, though heat rose in her cheeks. "No, I'll ensure he gets a light lunch when he joins you." She happened to know that Harry also liked chicken sandwiches, and she could whip that up without interrupting her day. Roy took the tray from her hands and laid it on his desk, ignoring the stacks and piles, even the yellow envelope. "Caitlyn," a tremble rushed through her as she adjusted her crucifix around her neck. "Yeah?" He took her hand and his warmth triggered another spark of awareness. "Thanks again for helping with my mother." "Oh, right." She slipped her hand away from him and hugged her waist. The only thing she'd ever done in life that she still liked about herself was back in college when she'd defied her parents and studied to be a nurse instead of acquiring some creative degree that enabled her to be a charming housewife for a lawyer. It was good to be useful even if in the end she'd married a lawyer. "Ava is a kind woman." Roy motioned toward the leather couch on the wall behind her. She knew that the sofa near the door had served him when he'd needed to read papers with his feet up at night. "Do you have a few minutes?" "Huh?" First he wanted to have a conversation, and now they were going to sit. He'd avoided her since their marriage. Today must be a full moon or something. She nodded, held her dress to the side to keep it from wrinkling, and sat. "I guess. Tea with the women isn't for another hour." He took the seat next to her, gliding into his chair like it was made for him. "I've noticed that we've come to a mutual silence as a way of living together." "True." Her mouth tingled for a kiss. She was never one to fantasize over a guy so honestly. The spike in her temperature was new. She stared at her lap as she said, "Yes, we both agreed on why." "We did." He swiveled so that his knees turned toward her. Her heart sped up at his closeness, and her mind raced. She'd agreed to stay his wife so his whole family would be united until they found whoever had set them up for prison. A divorce would take him off the list for the royal crown in a country she'd never heard of. He was fourth in line after his two older brothers and a new nephew that he loved. There was also something to do with a lot of money his family had, with a seemingly never-ending supply of oil. What he didn't know and would never know was that none of that mattered to her at all. What mattered was that she'd made her own choices and could have a voice. She had friends to visit daily, a bit of a job to stay busy, and she had less hardship now that she wasn't living on Jensen's commune or working for days on end at the hospital that offered no benefits, including the basic one of sleep. Roy adjusted his tie, but that only made the blue paisley pattern slightly crooked. "I wanted to ask if seeing Harry bothers you, or if it makes you jealous." Unable to stop the impulse, she reached out to straighten the tie. His hard muscles under her palm made her want to curl her fingers around the silk and pull him close. "He's happily married now." Roy stopped her but held both of her hands. "Yes, but we aren't, exactly." The day she'd married Roy in prison wasn't something either of them wanted to relive. She'd worn a simple white cotton dress, not caring to impress. Now aware of his every move, her face heated and adrenaline rushed through her. Caitlyn began to slip away. "We both agreed." Roy gripped her hands a little tighter and interrupted her. "I'm asking if you're jealous. Of Harry and Roxy?" "Oh." She batted her eyes and wished Roy would throw her down and kiss her senseless. No one had ever kissed her with such imagined passion, and she'd probably built up all this tension in her mind. She tugged free, refusing to acknowledge her own emotional response, and shook her head. I'm jealous that he's happy, but I want him to be. He was always my friend. Now that Roy wasn't touching her, she sounded calmer. That was good. Roy didn't move a muscle, but her skin sizzled from his nearness. You've said that before. It's still true. Her voice rose in pitch. He nodded and leaned closer. But we're not friends, you and I. No, we're not. She lowered her lashes to somehow block her feelings from his view. Was that interest in his deep voice? The way he'd held her hands? She widened her eyes. Her imagination was interfering with reality. There was no way the man with the oaky cologne would want her. Was he tired of the silence? I see how Logan and Hannah are happy together, and as time goes on, they're even happier. They are, Roy said without an argument. Before she could ask him if he wanted to be friends, or more than friends, Caitlyn cleared her throat. Well, this was a nice chat. She needed to get her head on straight and go about her day, so she placed her hands on her knees to get up. Roy said, I'm working so much of the time to clear my family of these charges. She followed through, stood, and looked down at him as she reminded him, and yourself, you need to be cleared too. Since she'd gotten to know him, he seemed selfless as he always put his family first. He rose to his feet and towered taller than most men. It wasn't fair how much she idolized him, though he couldn't know. I haven't forgotten, but I was hoping we could talk about us. Yeah, no, this was a bad idea. They were a bad idea. Thinking of them together, in bed, on the couch, on the balcony. More bad ideas. We're temporarily married roommates. True. He took a step to block her from easily walking out the door. You've never told me why our arrangement works for you. A jolt of desire made her knees weak. She shouldn't sound breathless. She wasn't some innocent maiden to be overcome by a man. Why are you asking now? One of the wives is betraying us. That was the cold water she needed to douse her libido. She took a deep breath and let her mind relax back into her normal state. And you think it's me? He traced her arm and goosebumps grew in his path. I don't actually, but I don't normally just go on feelings. It occurred to me that we are strangers. As soon as he'd intertwined his fingers with hers, she'd realized today was an anomaly. She'd check her vitals immediately after this meeting to make sure she wasn't getting sick. Caitlyn shouldn't be lusting after the same man she'd sworn to avoid after their fake vows a month ago. She hugged her waist to stay under control. Okay, what do you want to know? His gaze narrowed while he crossed his arms, looking down his nose with an expression that left her feeling defenseless before he even asked, why is our arrangement better than going to your parents or just leaving to live on your own? Now this was why he was a good lawyer. Her heart sank that he might judge her, and she had a pinch in the back of her neck just from avoiding him. Her past was no bouquet of roses, and her talking to the police wasn't exactly a betrayal. The police had been fair since the Bentley family had walked out of prison. She lifted her chin, cocked an eyebrow, and asked like she had all the confidence in the world, that is what you want to know about me? He motioned toward the couch she'd just left as he said, I need to know that I'm right to trust you. Okay, fine. She retook the seat and waited for him to join her. As their knees brushed, she ignored the ache to be held and this fantasy of hers to kiss him senseless. Once she was sure she could speak, she said, I'll start with the fact that your parents are nothing like mine. He held his hand together folded between his knees and paying apt attention to anything she might do while he asked, bad or good? Nothing in life was black or white. Sure, Roy was an attorney, but Lady Justice wasn't blind. Caitlyn bounced her foot, causing friction between the cloth of his navy blue suit and her bare knee, while she said, neither. But your parents let their children choose their lives and didn't run the show. Mine are the epitome of helicopter parents. They chose everything for me, right down to Harry. I almost married him because they picked him out for me. Roy had a way of looking down with his long nose that made him seem regal and untouchable but sexy enough that she wanted to run her fingers through his coarse dark hair. Living with a one-sided attraction shouldn't be so hard. You didn't love Harry? No. Perhaps Roy wouldn't like her answer, but the truth was something she'd shout for the rest of her life if she could. Caitlyn Cooper, the only daughter of Sam and Heather Cooper, was no one's insurance policy when it came to good sense. She shrugged. Honestly, he's nice, and maybe there was the beginning of affection, but I was trapped with Harry. I couldn't sign off on the rest of my life with a man I didn't choose. He smoothed his tie and asked in a way that made her feel cross-examined. So you left with Hannah to join a cult? His tone made her time in the woodland commune sound really bad. No one had raped her, or trapped her, or done anything bad to her. She'd chosen to leave Miami. And besides, she'd reported to the police everything she'd ever seen in the forest, and now here. At the beginning, she'd wanted to protect Hannah, her friend, from making even more bad decisions with following Jensen. Caitlyn adjusted her ponytail to tighten it. Hannah was the more religious one of us, but I fit in better because I am good at delivering what others want from me. She wasn't bragging, but she'd learned how to survive her parents until she could escape. He coughed, and her attention returned to his tie that he wore over his shirt that hid his perfectly formed male body. Why marry me? Drat. She swallowed and then let out a small laugh as she looked up at the white ceiling. Honestly, you were supposed to be horrible and a criminal, and the worst choice. Sorry to disappoint. I was going to make my parents stay far away with you being a bad boy, while I was able to come home to Miami and have some freedom. His disappointment hung in the air. She glanced out the window of his office, toward the tops of the palm trees that lined his balcony. The wind this high in the condo tower was stronger than she'd have imagined to create such sway. Caitlyn placed her hands over his. You don't get it, Roy. You were supposed to be my declaration that I am running my own life. Her parents came to mind. That I could live in Miami with plenty of cash without having to follow orders. The plan was perfect. He didn't move as he countered. You're not a child anymore. Now that was true. She couldn't blame all her decisions on Sam and Heather. That wasn't very responsible or adult-like. Caitlyn folded her hands in her lap. I might pretend to adult, but honestly I am not qualified to be successful on my own. DC taught me I wasn't happy just going to a job and coming home, without many luxuries. I was too spoiled as a child. Another truth. The hardest part of living on her own in DC was the daily monotony of her routine. In the last 2 years post-college, after leaving the forest, she'd gone to work as a nurse, treated as expendable, only to come home, watch something on TV before bed, and start the cycle all over again the next day. Her life, though free, had been nothing like she'd imagined, where she would work as a valued member of a team, enjoy off time with friends, and live like people on a sitcom. Roy didn't get it at all. I see. So why stay here now? Too bad she couldn't tell him that she voluntarily worked for the police detectives because she'd been sworn not to, though she wasn't hurting his family in any way. No one was doing anything illegal, so he had no worries. I like your parents and your siblings. I won't betray you. I can stick it out until you discover who is targeting your family. Neither of them moved. A bird flew outside the clear windows made to withstand hurricanes. Caitlyn, yeah? She glanced at the man way too hot to ever truly be hers. How did they let someone so charismatic argue in court? Every woman she'd ever known would swoon at the man who was her husband rather than find him mistaken. Roy stood and offered his hand. Tonight, instead of eating on our own, where you watch something on TV and I work, can we try something different? Like what? Her senses were alert from the way he held her hand. He gave her a heated look and asked, "Have the meal together while we talk?" Was that how the devil tempted innocence? She wasn't sure, but the fire in her belly from his simple glance set her off course. Like friends? He slowly unlaced his fingers from hers. Knowing more about each other means we can ease the tension. The flames inside her threatened to burn brighter even as she said, "Okay, I'd like that." She turned to leave, but he handed her the sandwich tray. Right. She took her lunch and left fast, needing to get herself under control and quickly. Tonight she had a date with her husband. She'd have to banish her fantasies about him and figure out how to sound like herself without getting all flustered with wishes that were never going to come to fruition. Imagination and real life never combined, and it was best if she faced him with a cool head. Chapter 2. Roy Bentley's mind twisted with possible avenues to investigate as he read his parents' former lawyer's case notes. There was something here. There had to be. His notepad full of scribbles suggested various options, but nothing so far stuck out as the main road to chase down. His number one goal right now was to clear his family of all charges. The FBI had a solid case, though almost all of the underlying facts were false. His brothers and parents were innocent, and the man across from him was trying to help him prove it. Harrison Hughes, Harry, was a great appellate lawyer, so his work was instrumental once they had all the paperwork in order. Roy closed the file he'd read, adjusted it to be even on top of the previous folders, and then picked up the next file. "Thanks for helping sort through this," Harry said. "If there was anything in my parents' old case files that might help your family, I want you to have it." Harry's phone began to ring, though he silenced it quickly, texted, and then put his phone in his back pocket, but not before Roy saw Roxy's picture flash on the screen. Roy settled in with the stack of legal documents. "Seems your fiancé wants you home." Harry closed the file he'd been reading and leaned forward with his hands folded. "Almost. Roxy and I are getting married this weekend. I have a favor to ask you about that." For his help, Roy already owed this man more than a single favor. He glanced up and asked, "What?" "Look, your brother Logan has agreed to be the best man at my wedding since he married my sister, and she's my only family. But I was hoping you and Caitlyn will come so Caitlyn's parents don't feel awkward." "Why did you invite them?" Harry's face was slightly red. "They were my parents' friends and wanted to come to my wedding. I didn't know how to say no. Leave the house." The danger was mounting against his family, though he'd risk his neck if needed, but not Caitlyn's. "Don't worry about security," Harry assured him. "I have already arranged for added guards." Then, of course, a prickling sensation on his skin reminded him he should probably speak to Caitlyn first. "When is it?" Harry picked up the papers he'd been reading while he said, "Friday night festivities and Saturday for the main event. I'll send you an invitation." "Do you need me to talk to Caitlyn too?" Harry and Roy's wife's history always made his spine tingle. He straightened. "Don't worry, I'll talk to her tonight." "Sounds good." Harry scanned the papers in his hands. They both worked in silence as the minutes ticked past. Nothing in the document Roy read struck him as paramount. "Huh." Harry shoved the paper he'd been reading at him as he said, "Now, in this case file my parents were investigating Lepore for possible intellectual property theft against your father's investments." "I don't know that name." Roy read the report Harry had handed him fast. Roy wrote the name in big letters on his notepad. "Could this man be the key?" "Let's find out more about him," Harry said. "It might be a cold trail, but I haven't found any casework that cleared this issue." "Sounds good." Roy's phone beeped and his glance turned to interest as he realized that an email had just come in from the FBI. His body tightened. "Finally." "What?" Harry stopped sorting through the folders. Roy opened his laptop with trepidation. "It's the FBI file against my family and me." Harry patted him on the back. "Send me a copy. We'll dig through every morsel and prove your innocence right now." This is good news. Now he didn't have to piece together what he assumed, but rather connect the facts. His old law firm had managed the impossible. He didn't know what leverage had been used, but he was grateful for the miracle. This email from Susan, his right-hand woman, gave him every piece of evidence the FBI had so he could disprove it, and possibly point the investigation toward whoever was setting the Bentleys up. The front door of the condo unlocked and a soft chime sounded within the office. Torn, Roy wanted to get right to work, but he also needed to talk to Caitlyn, not just about their new weekend plans. "Here it comes." He forwarded the file to Harry. "My wife is back." Harry waited until they both heard the noise that the email had been sent. He then checked his phone, put it down and said, "That's my cue to leave. We can touch base in the morning after we've read the documents?" "Thank you. I'll walk you out," Roy said. Living with Caitlyn this past month had been strained at first, but now they were almost friends. However, she'd been engaged to Harry, and that twisted Roy's stomach. They walked into the living room, and Harry gave Caitlyn a smile. There was no hug or handshake. "Caitlyn, thanks for the sandwich you left for me." She took off her shoes near the door and put them in a cabinet she'd placed there, though she handed Harry his shoes while she said, "Not a problem. Give Roxy my best." Harry slipped his black loafers on and security walked him toward the elevator. He and Caitlyn waved him off. He closed the door. Caitlyn took a small cake box she'd left on the counter and headed to the kitchen. He followed her, trying not to focus on the sway of her hips. Once she closed the refrigerator, he coughed for her attention. She glanced at him in surprise. "Caitlyn, we're going to Harry and Roxy's wedding next weekend." She hugged her waist. "Will my parents be there?" Her issues with her parents were likely the reason she had married him. Caitlyn didn't display any of the usual symptoms he'd seen in abused women, though. She reminded him of an old client, Linda Banker, who had been whenever she hugged herself. Roy motioned for her to join him in the living room. Yes, they were close to Harry's parents. I know. She walked past him, heading to the couch. She sank back against the cushion, and he took the seat on the other end of the couch to give her plenty of room. What's up with not wanting to see your parents? She turned and stared out the window. Leave it, Roy. Linda, when she'd filed for divorce and sought his legal help, hadn't wanted to use the domestic abuse issues in court and often avoided the discussion when she'd look out the window. Caitlyn had signs of abuse in her past, but perhaps he was clouded with years of law practice, so he kept his distance but asked, I thought we were getting to know each other. She let out a snort and then turned her entire body, lifting a leg onto the couch like she was about to school him as she tugged her collar. Fine, they'd hate this dress. They'd hate you simply because of the news. They absolutely hate every choice I've ever made in my life that they didn't pre-decide for me. Okay, he understood her rebellion in the past, so he chose his words. But that doesn't matter now. She slumped a little, but nodded her agreement. I just like to avoid negativity. She scooted closer to him and met his gaze without blinking. Can you do me a favor then? This could be good as a way to lay the groundwork to trusting each other. About your parents? She swallowed and glanced at his shoulder rather than him. Her face turned red. Yeah, can we pretend to be happy and in love at the wedding? He flinched. He hadn't expected that one, and he was good at analysis. Roy narrowed his eyes. You sure you don't want to sneak away and go home with them? Her face turned a more normal color as she met his gaze. Oh no, life is pretty good here these days. Caitlyn's strawberry blonde hair and blue eyes sparked something inside his ordinarily hollow heart. Life was pretty good? He frowned and carefully pointed out the facts. There are people out to throw us back in jail and possibly kill us all. She shrugged without batting an eye. You'll handle that. The trust she conveyed in that sentence skyrocketed the spark to the next level. He took a deeper look, unsure how to pinpoint his wife. She wasn't like anyone he'd ever met. Your parents bother you more than possible death? She slid across the leather seat, her knee poking from the hem of her pale green dress, not the actions of a victim. She pushed her hair behind her ears and let her hands rest on his that had been pressing into the couch cushion, waking up every cell in his body. That sounds crazy when you say it like that. And once again, Caitlyn made zero sense. He blinked and wished he understood her mind even though his heart beat differently from her touch. I don't know how else to say it. You don't know them. His voice lowered as he tried to figure out what spell she put on him even as he said, if that's what you want, I'll play along. A beep sounded from her phone in her pocket. She let him go and bounced up, heading to the door in a flash. I have to head upstairs to check on your mom. See you later for our dinner, Roy, and good luck finding a way to clear your names. I know you can do it. He waited as she slipped her shoes back on and stared at her backside as the green hem inched up to reveal a flash of thigh. That's the nicest thing you've said to me. She stood, fluffed her hair, straightened her dress, and then opened the door like she was in a marathon and headed for the finish line. I'm glad we're talking tonight. The moment she left, he could breathe easier. He wasn't wondering what she was doing or thinking and how he should react. He honestly had things to do. He headed into his office and picked up the file Harry had given him. Adam Lepore's name danced on the page. Hopefully this was the beginning of new things. He set the paper to the side to show his brothers at their meeting in half an hour and transferred his attention to the FBI file he'd printed. As the papers were still warm from printing and the last page came out, security beeped his phone and he checked to see who it could be. His brother Dylan had come up and he texted security to let him in. Roy stood from his desk and headed out of his office to meet him. Dylan took off his shoes near the door and slipped them in the cabinet. Hey, Roy, he waved him toward the office. Come in, Dylan. Once they were inside, Roy motioned to the leather chairs opposite his desk. I wasn't expecting to see you. Dylan settled in his seat and asked, how are things with you and Caitlyn? Did his brother, the investigator, smell trouble in his house? Or did he give off a scent of confusion? Roy picked up the FBI file. About the same with you and Lois, I imagine. Dylan nodded like he agreed entirely and wasn't happy about it. Lois's brother took a job at Delta Force One, the security company we hired. So I'm starting to use him in my investigations. But what if you have no evidence that your wife is the spy and Lois is the most timid out of all the wives? I think you're okay, Roy said. If he needed to bet on one of the wives being against them, he'd guess it was Beau's wife, Sarah, as she was always argumentative. Roy kept the thought to himself. But if it's working with her family that's bothering you, I can't complain. Caitlyn's ex-fiancé is here almost daily, and we're going to his wedding this weekend. Dylan's eyes widened as he took his cell phone out of his pocket and asked, "Together?" "Yeah." Roy imagined his arms around Caitlyn as he danced with his wife. The image left a wishful taste in his mouth, though he didn't say a word. Dylan shrugged. "I was thinking of taking Lois out of town for the weekend so we can really talk, away from the threat of danger. All my leads have gone nowhere." Right. The investigation. Roy needed to focus. He handed over the folder from the Hughes case to his brother. "Speaking of, Adam Lepore was being investigated against stealing from our father before we were arrested." Dylan opened the file. "I don't know that name." His brother quickly read the information as Roy said. "It was in the legal files we just received from Harry. Please find this guy and check out any connection to Curnow." Dylan closed the folder and stood. "I'm on it. We're counting on you to clear our name so we can travel without the government on our tails. My trip with Lois has to be within the United States." Roy rose, wanting to wave his magic wand and prove his case, but he needed evidence he didn't have. "That's all I work on." Which could be why things with Caitlyn were strained. Dylan headed out as he saluted him. "That's all any of us work on. Bye." Roy wished his mind was focused. Lately, his thoughts kept wondering what Caitlyn was up to, even though he knew she was upstairs taking his mother's blood pressure. Perhaps if he worked harder at ensuring they were compatible and friendly, the attraction in his veins would relax and he could do his job. Chapter 3. Caitlyn went through the clothes in her closet and chose a knee-length blue dress that skimmed her waist and pushed up her chest slightly for tonight's meeting with Roy. Hannah had agreed to help her with her hair and makeup, so she brought the dress with her to make sure it wasn't too much. She rang the doorbell of her best friend's door. Hannah immediately opened it and grabbed Caitlyn in a hug. "Thank you." Hannah waved her inside the condo she shared with Logan, Roy's brother, and ushered her to the extra bedroom. "Come, we'll figure out your hair. I have the supplies." Their condos were almost identical, though Hannah's extra bedroom was pretty much the same layout where Caitlyn slept every night in her own apartment. But she didn't say that. She hung up the dress behind the door and said, "I'm nervous." Hannah walked over to the desk she'd transitioned into a workstation with bobby pins, elastics, and hairbrushes all spread out. "So, you're starting to like Roy?" The hum in her head stopped suddenly, and her lips pursed. "I don't think so." Hannah laughed and opened the makeup kit on the desk. "But you're nervous about your hair and makeup. I remember when you swore off makeup last year." Last year, Caitlyn had been miserable and needed a change. She'd clearly run too far, too fast, but life was good now. Helping the police against Jensen had seemed like a way to get her life back on track, though part of her felt like she was betraying the Bentleys. The police insisted that she keep her communications secret. Not once had there been anything criminal to report. She joined Hannah at the workstation. "I'm not running anymore. Roy and I are going to your brother's wedding and my parents are going to be there." Hannah set some makeup brushes on the desk. "I'm glad Harry talked to you about that." "He talked to Roy." Caitlyn's face felt hot, and she hoped she wasn't too red as her strawberry blonde hair and brows made her look sickly when she blushed. "I had to explain to him that I've been avoiding my parents." "Well, I'll be there too." Hannah gestured to herself, then Caitlyn, and back to her. "But Hannah would be in the wedding party." Caitlyn glanced in the mirror and pulled her hair up, unsure how to style it. "You'll be busy for most of it." Hannah tapped her shoulder to get her to sit, which Caitlyn did. Then, just as they had when they were girls, Hannah began to do Caitlyn's hair. "I'm standing in the front for the first hour. After the ceremony, I can run interference with your parents. What did your husband say?" "Roy agreed to have my back," Caitlyn admitted. The thought of kissing Roy softly appeared like a mirage in her imagination. Hannah pinned a piece near the front as she said, "You like him. It's okay to admit it. Roy is handsome." Hiding her feelings from Hannah was impossible. Caitlyn looked up from her hair and pushed her head way back. Fine, he's not a horrible person or anything. And yes, he's easy on the eyes. Hannah laughed and tugged on some hairs to get Caitlyn to sit straight. Easy on the eyes? The Bentley brothers are hot as sin and you're tempted. Caitlyn smiled, busted. How is he treating you? Roy hadn't been very nice the day they'd married, or in the weeks after. He'd only started being polite once she'd volunteered to help with his mother's health. We've agreed to try and be friends. It's good you're still happy after falling in love so fast. I am. Hannah finished, and then showed her a crystal hairpiece. Caitlyn nodded yes. She needed to feel good tonight. Hannah pinned it to the top. Roy will want more than friends once he sees you like this, which is what you want too, right? I don't know. He could have any woman in the world. Caitlyn wasn't sure who she was, although she was very clear about who she wasn't. Try to know what it is you want. Hannah stepped back and crossed her arms. Now head downstairs and be confident. You used to be the hottest girl in high school. Caitlyn paused. The only reason she'd been sort of popular was because she'd been dating Harry then, not because she was anything special. She carefully shook her styled head. No, that was never me. Hannah walked with her toward the door. And you seriously still deny it? Get going, Caitlyn. Someday you will see what I see when I look at you. Thanks for our help. Meeting with Roy meant she'd have a chance to at least befriend him. She didn't really feel 100% comfortable living with him as his wife because the energy between them was potent and she wasn't sure what to do. She took the elevator down a floor and then slipped into her room without seeing him. He must still be in his office. She changed into the royal blue dress with the crystal trim that matched the clip Hannah had put in her hair, and then double-checked her makeup. Satisfied with her appearance, she headed out to the living area. Roy was in the kitchen, his back toward her. She called out, "Hey, Roy, are we cooking?" He turned, and his serious expression became one of surprise as his eyes widened. Her body temperature rose in response. "What's wrong?" He walked out of the kitchen and took her hands when they met in the living area and said, "You look great." His admiration made her hot, and her pulse spiked. If she couldn't think near him, again, then she'd be in trouble. She patted her styled hair. "Hannah convinced me to put my hair up." He tugged on his navy blue t-shirt and pointed out his blue jeans. "You outclass me tonight." He turned like he'd leave, but she held his arm so he didn't go to his room and change. "I like your jeans. I swear you wear your suits for breakfast half the time." He stopped, but then nodded. "I've been working on our cases." She glanced behind his huge shoulders, curious as to what he was doing in the kitchen. Her stomach was in knots, and she hoped it was because she was hungry and not because she wanted Roy, as that might ruin the small peace they'd formed. And besides, she was clueless about tonight. He'd made all the plans and she hadn't eaten since the tea, which wasn't much food. "I'm not judging. Relaxing is important too." He pointed her toward the balcony door that overlooked the ocean. "I ordered dinner out on the balcony. The nicest of the balconies in this condo." She never used hers as it overlooked other high-rises, though she could see the intracoastal. They walked outside where stringed lights curled around the bars of the balcony and the door behind them. She turned and noticed pink and red roses set in vases, as if ready for romance. Had to be her imagination. She studied the glistening ocean. "I see that. The lights and the moon make this scene breathtaking beautiful." He stared at her profile and said, "You being here does that, if only they were possible." She gazed into his eyes. Compliments are new. He motioned toward the table and held out a chair for her. She slipped into the seat and fixed her napkin while he took the seat next to her. Roy pointed toward 2 bottles and asked, "White or red?" "White," she said fast. He held out the bottle for inspection. "Pinot Grigio good for you?" He'd gone all out and almost seemed nervous, so she stroked his arm and said, "Yes, thanks." No boyfriend had been this thoughtful in a long time, if ever. Harry's crowning event might have been prom night, and that was years ago. She'd always been the one to organize everything, even then. She smelled the platter without lifting the silver cloche. "Rosemary, what did you order?" "Lamb chops." He showed her the savory meat and then made a plate for her. His taut muscles indicated nerves. How strange. Roy was sexy and clearly could have any woman he'd want by just winking at her to come hither. She needed to lighten the mood, so she raised her eyebrow and teased, "What if I said I was a vegetarian?" He sat down with a half smile. "I'd laugh as you made me chicken for dinner." "Good." She let out a small sigh like she was upset, though she wasn't at all. "So living with you has disadvantages." His gaze sharpened, and his tightness meant she'd said the wrong thing as he asked, "What are those?" Drat, flirting wasn't her forte, but she tried to push forward again and hoped she was clearer in her meaning. "You can call me out." He sipped his wine and then scooted closer. "Ignoring you is getting harder for me." Goosebumps grew on her arms. She hadn't expected him to say that. She hadn't expected Roy to be attracted to her. The image of kissing him right now was tempting. He smelled of a woodsy cologne that she now loved. "Really? I think I'm pretty forgettable." "Impossible." He brushed his arm against hers. The spark that grew inside her went off the chart. She couldn't think until she moved her hand. She reached out and took a small sip from her wine, which was sweeter than she remembered. Once she could think, she said, "Harry moved on fast and found someone new. My parents never bothered to track me down when I left. You and I married and didn't speak to each other for weeks. Forgettable." He didn't blink at her list, "And I'm apologizing about that." "Are you?" She narrowed her gaze until all she could see was him. It was like they were the only two people in the world tonight. She sipped her wine again and imagined for a moment actually being his wife and not just in name only. "I didn't realize that's what dinner was about." He waited for her to put her glass down and then folded his hands on hers. "It's not the only point of dinner. I am sorry that I ignored you because you're the kind of woman I was not looking for." She froze and tried to understand what he meant by that. "And what kind of woman is that?" He kissed her hand and her entire body jumped in excitement. "Nice, kind, sweet." Caitlyn pulled free because if he continued to touch her, she'd melt and not be able to think coherently. She adjusted her earring and said, "I sound like an old lady." Roy sat back. "You are a classy lady." Classy still didn't mean desirable, and for once in her life, she wished she wasn't just the salad dressing on the side of the plate in his life. She let her ear go before she looked completely silly. "So what were you looking for?" He cut off a piece of tender lamb and chewed thoughtfully. For a few seconds, she feared he'd not answer at all. Her heart deflated like a popped balloon, and she took a few bites. At last, he put his fork down. "Before getting jailed for a crime I didn't do?" She finished her bite and nodded. "Yes." He wiped his fingers on his napkin. "Before that, I wasn't looking for a lady to settle down with. I wanted a mild distraction at the end of the day." Her mind swirled, wondering exactly what distraction meant. Was that his word for attractive or desirable? She sipped her wine. What does that mean? What was this woman like? He finished his glass and picked up the wine bottle to refill them both as he said, "She was the kind that didn't leave me wondering about her in the morning. With you, I think about what you might be doing during the day. Wonder how your day is going when I don't see you." He confessed this without flinching. He wondered about her? That made no sense. She lowered her lashes as she hoped her cheeks weren't too red. "But you know exactly where I am and what I'm doing." He placed his hand on hers and squeezed it. "You helped care for my mother, so I owe you for more than I can ever repay." Ugh. This was friendship and politeness on his end. She knew better and shouldn't have hoped for more. She took a deep breath. Going to the hospital with her wasn't hard. It was nice having one patient instead of countless beds where I walked the halls, checking charts at night. "What did you do as a nurse before you helped my mom exactly?" "I worked in the ER mostly, and I was always per diem, which meant I worked long hours and was never full-time with benefits." "Why did you work like that?" "It was all I could get, honestly, which was super humbling. I thought nursing was going to be my ticket to freedom and not a one-way ticket to another life disaster. Like our wedding. No, marrying you was a needed change. Well, Caitlyn, I'm more attracted to you now than the day we married." Roy's words made every hair on her body stand at attention and crave his touch. She peered into his brown eyes that made her swoon. "And I wore white and everything that morning. You were beautiful, but I didn't trust you. How could I?" "Wait!" He thought she was beautiful. Her heart lifted higher in her chest as she asked, "You trust me now?" "That's what this dinner is about." His voice went deeper and her skin electrified at every word. "I didn't want to be attracted to you." She stroked her neck, wishing he'd touch her. This wasn't good. He was attracted to her, but didn't want to be, just as she was attracted to him and didn't want to be. "I see." She cleared her throat. "Well, Roy, I know you're one of the good ones, but you're going to have to kiss me a few times so we look comfortable at the wedding." He gently caressed her face, sending heat that scorched right through her as he said, "You fascinate me, Caitlyn Cooper. Caitlyn Bentley. I changed my name." She closed her eyes. She refused to be her parents' pawn. Roy's lips met hers and she melted. He kissed even better than she imagined. Chapter 4. The sun shone outside Roy's office window. He didn't have a direct path from his office to the sun because the sun was over the ocean, but the southern view still had plenty of light. Caitlyn's hair was mostly blonde on those rare occasions he'd seen her outside, in the sunshine. He twirled his pen in his hands while he sat in his leather chair, slightly rocking it on its wheels. His brother tapped on the bamboo desk. "I need you focused, Roy." Roy blinked. This was stupid. His lips shouldn't tingle from Caitlyn's kisses. Last night had been a mistake. He slammed the pen down harder than he meant to as he said, "Sorry, I was distracted. Adam Lepore is from Hoshkel." Dylan pushed his tablet toward him. Good. His brother was clearly a cooler head than he this morning. "I figured he'd changed his name, like we did. What else?" Dylan flicked the page, and a passport photo was blown up as he said, "This is his picture. I don't recognize him. Dark hair and eyes, could be from anywhere." Roy shook his head and handed the tablet back. "What else do you have?" Dylan opened another file on his tablet. "He was in the same office building as our parents. At the same time the FBI said our father supposedly transferred the first wire of $1 billion to an unmarked account." Roy picked up his pen and twirled it. Perhaps they'd finally found a hole in the seemingly perfect setup his family had endured. Then he was stupid, being in the building. Electronic transfers can be done from anywhere. Dylan nodded. So why was he there? Why take that risk? Roy held back on tapping the pen, a nervous habit that always annoyed his family, but the impulse hit him. He put the pen down and his mind settled on the question. Finally, he said, "Unless he wanted to see our father that day, and Dad didn't know he was being double-crossed by someone he knew. This would be the first act of hubris." Dylan trailed off. Again, the sunlight and Caitlyn's hair played in his mind. Dylan coughed and asked, "What are you thinking?" Wow, he was out of it. He massaged his temples and refused to mention Caitlyn as he said, "Sorry, nothing. I was distracted." The front door opened. Caitlyn was home. Dylan turned his head toward the closed office door and then back to him as he asked, "By your wife?" "Yeah." Roy's face felt hot. He'd never really talked about one particular woman for long in his family, as he never brought one to anything more than once. Caitlyn was different. Dylan put his tablet back in his leather bag. "I'm still taking Lois out of town. I'm sure Harry's wedding will be a good way to get to know more about Caitlyn." Perhaps the doubts that clouded Roy's thoughts might dissipate when he finally saw Caitlyn around Harry. Would she be upset at the wedding? Or just fine, like she'd insisted all along? And when he met her parents, that would be telling. He picked up his pen again as he said, "The wedding tomorrow will be interesting." "Interesting?" Dylan commented as he stood. "That doesn't sound like happiness." Roy rose as well and crossed his arms. "I'm not a fool. Caitlyn married me to prove she was over Harry." "Did she tell you that?" Dylan adjusted his bag. The opposite. Caitlyn claimed she felt nothing, but something in her story didn't add up in his mind. He trusted Caitlyn with his family, but the facts kept ringing in his ear that he'd missed some pertinent piece of information that she didn't share. He lowered his head to confide in his brother. "No, but it's the only thing that makes sense. She's hiding something, mostly using her parents to deflect." Dylan put his bag down and kept his voice low. "So you don't trust her? Could she be the spy?" "Absolutely not. This wasn't about her hurting his family. Caitlyn wasn't that." He shook his head. "I don't think she's the spy in our midst, no." Dylan shouldered his bag. "But you don't trust her." Roy dropped his arms. Last night he'd told the truth that he was attracted to his wife. He walked with his brother to head out as he said, "I do trust her, mostly." But there is something that doesn't add up in her story on why she married me. Oh, Dylan stopped near the door. This could have nothing to do with her. You don't want to be like our older brothers Ollie and Logan. Are you missing your old life? Afraid of being tied down? Oliver had been with Rachel almost as long as he remembered, and Rachel was the closest to an older sister he'd ever had. Logan and Hannah seemed to have genuinely found love. Roy reached for the door. Yes and no. I miss my law firm and acting like the CEO. Dylan followed with a snort. I meant your faceless women. Roy's head flipped back and forth while he searched for Caitlyn in the hall, or the living area. The kitchen, empty. She must have gone to her room. No, I don't miss anyone. At the front door, Jake patted him on the back as a goodbye. Well, we'll continue on the Adam Lepore file. Bo is working on tracking IPs used, so hopefully we will have some hard evidence soon. Good. If they had one thread of evidence, then hopefully the rest might be uncovered soon. Once their names were cleared, the rest of the investigation would be easier. Bye, Dylan. He watched his brother pass security and head into the elevator. Once he was gone, Roy closed and locked the door. They'd all taken security very seriously. Caitlyn popped her head out of her bedroom, wearing her gym clothes, which meant she'd worked out with his mother, and said, "Your brother is leaving early." Her genuine smile made him feel alive inside, like her nearness somehow made his soul brighter than the sun outside. Parts of his skin that never felt anything now had the pins and needles sensation while she walked closer to him. He widened his stance to balance himself as he asked, "How is my mother?" Caitlyn passed him, heading toward the kitchen as she waved for him to follow and said, "She's good. She was complaining you haven't come up to visit her as much as she likes, but she's getting stronger." He followed her hips that swayed in snug black pants. "I see her every morning." She opened the refrigerator and took out the unsweetened iced tea. "I know." She took out 2 glasses and said, "I think her spirits are down because her sister-in-law is dead." Were they friends? She mentioned they used to go shopping together. Once she finished pouring, she handed him a glass as if he'd asked for it. He took it, letting her fingers brush against his own as he said, "My mother didn't like Aunt Dinah much." Oh. She took several long drinks and then topped off her glass. "Well, maybe it's because she's stuck in the house with your father and wishes they could go out. She's not saying that or complaining at all, so I'm trying to figure out what's wrong. I'm working on proving our innocence, which will help her sleep better." Her words piled up higher on his shoulders, like rocks he needed to carry up a mountain. She finished her second cup and let out a sigh. She walked over to the sink as she asked, "Can I help?" Part of him believed Caitlyn could do anything, though she wasn't a lawyer. He'd watched her with his mom and his family, and the other wives. His stomach churned. He was married to a saint. He put his glass on the counter untouched and spoke like he needed to confess. "I told Dylan that I wasn't sure about your motives for marrying me." She stopped cold from washing her glass and glanced up at him with confusion. "Last night you said you trusted me, and this was why he was sick to his stomach." He walked over and took her glass to rinse it. "That's just it. I do, but there is this huge hole in the story I don't understand." She crossed her arms but didn't move away as she faced him in his kitchen. "I left Harry and went with Hannah to follow Reverend Jensen." He put the glass in the drying rack. Her proximity made him feel hot and confused as she said, "We lived in his forest retreat for a while, and we met Lois there. Then we left, and for the first time in my life I had to work for a living. I'd graduated from nursing school." This was the part that bugged him. She was free of her parents and free of living in the forest. She worked as a nurse in a hospital, so the pay wasn't that horrible compared to other jobs available. She lived in a studio, near her friends in a broken-down area of DC. His mind swirled that she didn't need to marry him at all. She'd gotten her freedom, as she'd said she wanted. "So you married me to avoid work. It was about the money?" That was something he could understand. She fixed her necklace around her throat as if it choked her. "No, it's always been about my parents." His chest rose, but he shook his head and said, "This is why my head spins. You're not a child, and you were already free of them before we met." She stepped backward, and the distance left him cold. "Listen, maybe we were better before last night when we were just friendly strangers." His emotions didn't match with his brain, and he knew it, but his eyes widened anyhow as he asked, "And you'd be okay that way?" He'd felt her desire in her kiss. She hugged her waist and took another step back. It's clear you're suspicious and don't take things at face value. The fact that she never explained the part that confused him for a month made his shoulders tighten. As a lawyer, he was trained to ask the questions no one else asked to dig out the truth. He didn't move. So there is something. She turned away, and her face went into shadows as she said, "I've been honest as the day is long, but you doubt me, which means you don't trust me at all." If she left now, he might never get the chance to tell her that he wanted this to work out between them. And despite his one issue that bothered him, everything else about Caitlyn was a dream. He closed the gap in 2 strides and gently took her wrist. "There is one thing I know for a fact." She crossed her arms like she needed to defend herself from attack as she asked, "And what is that?" The beat of Roy's heart was steady and sure as he pressed closer and her soft body warmed next to him. "I want you more with every passing second." "Oh." She closed her eyes. Their lips met, and he was lost. Every part of him wanted Caitlyn. In her kiss, he forgot the rest of his doubts and just focused on her when the thought that drove him hit him. Caitlyn was his, and he needed to prove that to her. Whatever had happened before they met didn't really matter. Chapter 5. Caitlyn's body felt jumpy and electrified from Roy's touch, but this new desire just made it more important for her to protect him from her parents. And yet, Roy was her main defense against them. He had no idea how bad they could be. Oh, they were society polite, and they might be nice to his face, but behind closed doors at the Cooper mansion, they'd whisper to each other how horrible Roy was, and now married to their daughter? She would do her best to help her husband. She knocked on his bedroom door and waited. Roy opened it, holding his phone in his hand, dressed a gray business suit with no tie. "What are you wearing to the wedding?" He tugged his jacket and then looked her up and down. Her emerald dress clung to her figure, and her body ached for his touch just from that single scan. "Do you want to coordinate?" And her lustful thoughts needed to go. She picked up a flounce at the hem. "Yes, I'm hoping you have a similar tie." His phone rang as he dug around for socks in a drawer. "Go into my closet and find one you like while I take this call." She bounced into his closet and hoped he had something that matched. She went through his tie rack, but then stopped as she heard his conversation. Unwittingly, as he'd put his brother on speaker. "Dylan, I thought you were going on vacation." "Adam Lepore is in Miami," Dylan said, "and he's walking around town in a House of Morgan suit." "Adam? Seriously?" She knew that name. So she held her breath as Roy asked, "Where is he getting the money?" "Good question. Last year he'd done odd jobs for Jensen. Now he wore designer clothes? That made no sense." Dylan then said, "He works for Kerno. We have no evidence yet that he set us up, but Bo is following the electronic trail." She stumbled backward but caught the door frame to use as leverage before she fell. Adam worked for Kerno? Last year she hadn't thought much of him, but Lois had hated him so much that she'd left the commune with her and Hannah. All she'd say was that Adam wasn't a good person. Roy asked, "How do you know he works for Kerno then?" Caitlyn grabbed a tie and intended to head out to see him, so he remembered she was there. Dylan said, "Security and I have cross-referenced to amp up my investigation since my PI license was suspended. However, I still have contacts, and thanks to my wife's brother, I have Adam's bank statements. The day we were arrested, Adam raked in a $100,000 bonus." Roy's voice dropped with a groan. "We were betrayed for so little?" "Seems so." Judging from their conversation, neither brother knew much about Adam. She walked out with her arms crossed, unsure how to join in with her observations. Roy buttoned his shirt and took the tie without a word to her as he said to his brother, "Keep me posted. We're getting ready for the rehearsal dinner for the wedding." "Have fun with Caitlyn," Dylan said, and they both ended the call. Roy tucked his phone in his back pocket and adjusted the black tie with emerald green designs. "Do you like this tie on me then?" She nodded but lifted her chin. A few months ago, she'd given the police detailed reports about Adam Lepore, as she'd been suspicious of his actions in the commune. She hadn't mentioned that to Roy, but she'd sworn to keep talking to the police a secret from them. How to explain without revealing her position with the police department? "Why do you look confused?" He didn't blink as he searched her face. She lowered her head, unsure why she was so shy or why her heart sped up, but she forced her lips to open and said, There was an Adam Lepore that lived in the commune. Lois left with us because she hated that guy. Has Dylan asked his wife about him? Roy's eyes widened, but he dug his phone from his back pocket and said, "Texting him now. What do you know about him?" Roy looked at his screen while she swallowed and said, "Not much. Dark hair, brown eyes." He then held up his phone and showed her a picture. She nodded. "Yes, that's him." He put his phone away and she swayed on her feet. She wished she could repeat the reports, but she'd promised and they used her reports to catch bad people, so she needed to keep her lips sealed. She swallowed hard. He, Jensen, and another guy named Sam Zandy were often together. He brought out his phone again, and she assumed Roy was texting his brother Sam's name. Roy took her hand. Her heart did a little flip as he asked, "Why didn't you mention them before?" He sounded hurt, but she'd shared what she suspected with the police and then banished the 3 men from her mind. The police had instructed her to keep her eyes open for anything suspicious inside the condo with the Bentley family. No one knew she'd helped the police, and no one needed to know. You never asked. Being near Roy made her feel safe. "Do you need us to write down everyone Jensen ever met with?" His smile made her insides feel like she just won the lottery before he said, "That might be helpful." She quickly nodded and let the feeling she was showered in sunlight surround her. "I normally meet with the wives every day for tea. Let me get together with Hannah and Lois and we'll make a list." "Thank you." Those simple 2 words were enough to make her long to explain more. She tugged on his tie and went closer to him as she asked, "So your doubts are dissipating?" His arms wrapped around her waist, and for once she truly felt like his wife when he said, "I'm letting them go. It happened before we met." Her heart raced. She stilled, wishing she wasn't all fluttery inside and that she could be completely honest with him as she asked, "And you can do that? I can try." He kissed her cheek, and his touch sent off a blaze. But then he stepped back and asked, "Are you ready for the rehearsal dinner?" Ready? She could float on air. But then she remembered her parents. Her spine stiffened until she rushed to the door and said, "Give me 2 minutes. I need to fix my face." Her mother would be critical as always. "You're already beautiful," he called from his bedroom. But she was in the hall. Her pulse spiked near him and she needed to breathe. Tonight she would see her parents. She wasn't sure what she'd do, but she needed to at least look good. She dabbed on makeup and checked herself in the mirror. Everything appeared in order, and her eyeliner and mascara hadn't run anywhere. Do good. She bolted from the room and saw Roy in the kitchen with a glass of water. She walked to the door and took her emerald green heels out of the new cabinet she'd ordered to keep the shoes out of sight and slipped into them. "I'm ready now." He rinsed his glass and joined her, putting his black loafers on as he said, "My brother talked to Lois and your plan is set to make your list together Monday." Perfect. She figured it wouldn't be an issue. She took his arm to straighten herself and checked the mirror near the door to make sure she was still put together. At her engagement party to Harry, her mother and father had both insulted her choice of an ice blue dress until she'd changed into the navy blue her mother had chosen for her. This time, they'd not make her go and change like a child with all their negativity. Roy placed his hand on her lower back. "Caitlyn, anything you can tell me about your parents might be nice." They walked out together, and security whispered to each other as she asked Roy, "Why?" "I'm about to meet them," he said while they went down the elevator alone. The music that played seemed light, which was the opposite of the how she felt near Roy. "Just remember we're happy and in love when we see them." He offered his arm when the doors opened. "Are you sure that's what you want?" "Positive," she answered. A limo waited for them outside, as well as various security officers. Roy had taken care of all the details. Neither said much as they rode the short 2 minutes to the nearby resort that was the venue for Harry's wedding on the beach. Once there, Caitlyn clutched Roy's arm as they headed into the resort. The sound of people in the lobby rattled her slightly. She hadn't seen new people in a month now. Caitlyn held Roy's arm a little closer. As they walked into the private party, her entire body became tight. Her parents spotted her and her heart raced. She whispered, "Here they come." Roy stood straighter and patted her hand. If he was a life preserver and she was drowning, she couldn't clutch any tighter. She swallowed, but Roy was faster as he held out his hand to shake and said, "Mr. and Mrs. Cooper, it's nice to meet you." Neither of them even glanced at Roy. Nevermind shook his hand. Her father's full head of silver and gray hair, matched with cool blue eyes, like one of those silver foxes. Her mother's dyed blonde hair and expert makeup designed to make her seem 20 years younger was still flawless. Her father blocked her view of the ballroom until he finally moved like he'd let them pass. Their rudeness was unforgivable, and at last Roy withdrew his hand. Her mother gave her a once-over. "Caitlyn, we've missed you," her mother said in chilling tones. "You've gained weight, haven't you?" "No." She clutched her stomach, but then stopped. She'd no longer be a party to their intolerance, and she wouldn't listen to more criticism. She held her head higher and patted Roy's strong, muscular arm as she saw the two-story, all-glass ballroom on the beach, with a skyline that beamed sun or moonlight on the dance floor. "Mom, Dad, this is Roy Bentley, whose hand you just refused to shake." Her father gave her one of his "we care about you" looks that had once made her go along with their plans. "We know who he is, dear. We just need to know that you're okay, though now I see why the wedding happened so fast." Neither of her parents looked at her husband, and the cracks about her weight weren't nice. This was the last straw. She quickly met Roy's big brown eyes and then turned toward her mother. "Better than okay. Roy and I just found out we're having a baby." Roy flinched but didn't say a word. Her mother gasped and whispered with another look at Caitlyn's waistline. Oh goodness, she never lied like this. Not telling Roy about the police investigation was helping the good guys, but now she'd crossed her own line. Why had that flown out of her mouth? She pushed forward with her bold statement, unsure how to take it back. Surprise didn't sound right. She managed, "I know it's a surprise." Her father gave her that sympathetic look of his that he was so good at, but then said, "Caitlyn, you've changed so much, we hardly recognize you." What he meant was she wasn't listening to his advice, and now he couldn't get her out of her own mistake. That statement was always what he said when he disapproved. Her free hand curled into a fist as she tried to smile. "You shouldn't be. I'm still me. Caitlyn is the best wife I could ask for," Roy said, his hand on her lower back. "She's wonderful." Her father then said, still not deigning to look at Roy, "We raised her as our princess. We didn't want her to lower her standards. Father, Roy would be a prince if he was in his old country, which makes me actually a princess now," Caitlyn said. "And if you care at all, he's innocent, the same as the rest of his family." Roy's touch moved from her lower back up her spine to her nape. Warmth grew inside her. At least she spoke the truth. "Now I've heard everything." Her mother tugged her father to go with that pensive, "we're going to talk" thin-lipped face, and Caitlyn understood they'd negate anything positive of the conversation while they drank. The moment they were alone again, Caitlyn shook her head and whispered, "I'm so sorry." "Don't be. I get it now." Roy kissed her cheek. Roy had witnessed her parents' behavior and their intolerance against her choices. Her face was still warm from his touch. Now, if only she hadn't said that stupid lie, the evening tonight and the wedding tomorrow might be easier. Chapter 6. Caitlyn was huddled with Hannah and Roxy as they discussed the upcoming wedding, so Roy walked over to the bar and his brother, Logan. Logan immediately patted him on the back and asked, "Roy, what's going on? You and Caitlyn are having a baby, I guess?" Dread filled his stomach like lead. Logan gulped his drink. That's usually a yes or no question that we follow with an offer of a cigar." He'd never lied to his family. But then his mother had never once mentioned his sister's weight, and usually said a woman was worth more than that weight in gold. He already understood Caitlyn's mother wasn't the same. Roy preferred the truth even if it hurt, and even if the person lying thought it was for the best. He'd spent his adult life seeking the truth, no matter its form. But maybe this once he understood. Caitlyn looked amazing in her green dress, with her hair up. His fingers itched to zip that dress off her and worship every morsel of her sexy self. But as he saw Caitlyn's parents across the bar, he simply pressed his lips together and said, "Logan, it's complicated." "Complicated calls for drinks." His brother held out his finger and signaled the bartender. Roy said, "Sure does." Logan told the bartender, "1 whiskey neat for my brother here, and 1 whiskey sour for me." With family, they didn't need to ask what they wanted to drink. They knew each other's favorites. When it came to Caitlyn, he honestly didn't know her drink preferences, and if she was his wife, he should. Or was that an excuse to talk with her more? His brother nudged his shoulder. "I didn't think you and Caitlyn were getting along enough for baby making." Clearly, he spoke too much to his family. Tension built at the top of his spine and worked its way down like a snake. He needed to talk to Caitlyn about this, but for now, he said, "Technically, you don't have to like a woman to get her pregnant." Logan made a sound but stayed silent as the bartender delivered their whiskey. Once the bartender left, Logan handed Roy his drink and then clinked it as he said, "But you like her now." Roy sipped his whiskey sour and admitted, "Caitlyn is unlike anyone I've ever known." Logan motioned toward the women, who seemed to be breaking their huddle over dresses. "Well, you never dated or looked at a good woman, so it must have taken you a while to figure it out." Perhaps that's why he was unprepared for how he'd reacted toward Caitlyn. If she was one of the women in his past, he'd have stripped her and taken her to bed already and forgotten all about her while he dove into his workload. But there was something about Caitlyn he respected, so he was now lost. He sipped his drink again. "I idolized being single for too long. Yeah, and you're right. I wasn't prepared. Congrats." Logan lifted his whiskey neat. Roy took the last sip, and once he finished, he put his glass on the table and said, "Thanks." Caitlyn had left the conversation she was in, so Logan walked across the ballroom and met her near the dance floor. Harry and Roxy decided to dance, and the DJ transitioned to a slow song for the bride and groom, though other couples were already dancing. Roy brushed his hand against Caitlyn's bare arm and asked, "Caitlyn, can you talk?" She bit her lip as more couples passed them. She motioned with her head. "Everyone else is heading to the dance floor. Fair." His mother made him take lessons in case the royal court was ever reformed. He held out his hand in a formal move. "Then let's dance." She followed his lead effortlessly, though she seemed surprised at his strong grip on her waist. She'd obviously had lessons, and they danced as if they'd been partners for years. A minute into the song, she took a deep breath and said, "I'm really sorry that just came out of my mouth." That referenced the baby story, clearly. He spun her, and once she was in his arms again, he asked, "So I'm not about to be a father?" Her face turned red and she missed a step, but then caught up and said, "Yeah, that was really stupid on my part." His mind focused in on her story earlier. Perhaps this also fit into what he didn't understand about her. "Why did you tell your parents that lie?" "They still get to me." She responded right away, though her dance moves were now stiff as she spoke. "It wasn't just that they picked everything in my life. It was always their attitudes that bothered me more. They should have shaken your hand. It was beyond rude. If someone had treated his sister Elle badly, he'd have planned the man's murder." He didn't view her parents' actions as that out of line, considering their daughter had married a stranger who had been in jail. Luckily, Elle was planning her wedding to someone he actually liked. "They love you, though they were wrong about how you look in that dress." "How do I look?" "Prettier than the bride. You're the prettiest woman here." "No, but thank you." She shook her head and held him a little tighter. "My parents love the idea of me, and I tried to disappear rather than be like them." Her life in DC had that hole in it that he didn't understand. "You aren't at all like them." She lifted her chin and relaxed back into the dance, moving more flawlessly as she said, "I think I like hiding out from the world and not having to worry about anything." Interesting. She was happy with him because she didn't need to see her parents. The thought gnawed at what he knew. "So, my problems are your safe harbor." Her cheeks flushed again as she said, "That sounds really bad." "It doesn't if it's true." Lies were for other people, as the truth mattered more than anything else. Caitlyn patted his arm and her face whitened, though she shook her head. "I don't think like that. I want you to clear your name so you can figure out who set you up." Ice went through him. He wanted Caitlyn. He knew he shouldn't, but that didn't matter. He met her clear blue eyes and was lost. "The danger with clearing our name is that the police stop following us around. That's been useful on a few occasions." Her eyebrow lifted as the song ended and he let her go. "But then you get your freedom, which is what you wanted." "Yes." The music shifted to something faster. He let her off the dance floor as other people jumped around to the song. Once they were standing on the sidelines, he said, "And no, it changes you needing to hide out in the condo. I get to run my law firm again, which I can't while being out on parole. My staff knows I'll be back, but right now it operates without me, and it's driving me crazy." The music changed and a few people left the dance floor, heading toward plates that were served. Neither one of them moved. She hugged her waist and asked, "And you might not need a wife anymore?" Having one can also be a good thing. His hands held her tighter. Caitlyn was his, and he needed to prove that to her, even if doubts clouded his mind. For now, he massaged her shoulder until she dropped her arms. But I'm looking forward to being a father. When do we find out the gender of our baby? Her lips curled into a smile. Stop, that's not funny, she said on a small huff of a laugh. You're laughing. Waiters left the kitchen with dinner trays, and she looked up at him, making him feel good. I'm happy with you. Then we're agreed. Caitlyn accepted his hand and they walked to the other side of the ballroom where their dinner was about to be served. So it's not the end of us if I succeed in finding the responsible party? They passed the bride and groom table in the middle as he imagined sitting there with Caitlyn, and the image didn't scare him. She hadn't glanced at Harry once all evening. She'd focused on him. His stomach churned as Caitlyn said, "We're going to have to take it day by day. Let's just see what happens." Logically, she made sense, but her words made his chest tighten. He squeezed her hand. "You can just say you want to be my wife." They made it to their seats. She looked down and asked, "If I do want that, would you?" Part of him wanted to believe she was just shy, but his mind swirled there was a secret to be uncovered. He ignored that question, pulled out her chair, and held it for her. "Yeah, as long as you know you'll have to go to a few firm events. Naturally, I'll be home less during the day and back in my office for work." She sank down to her seat, and he pushed her in as she picked up her napkin with a shrug. "You spend your days in your home office already. You might as well be a ghost for all I see you. It could be even more," he warned, sitting beside her. He was silent as Michael Marshall, someone his brother Logan considered brilliant on the stock market, and his wife Calliope joined their table. Caitlyn didn't seem to know them and asked Roy, "So you want a wife you never see?" Michael and his wife stared at them openly. Clearly, Caitlyn's comment had been overheard. His face felt hot and he spoke with his back to them. "I need to make sure the firm returns to the top with my leadership." He'd like to finish this conversation when they were alone. The waiter brought their plates, and Eva Bishop, the newest movie star, and her husband Brandon, the Hollywood producer, sat next to her. Caitlyn lowered her voice. "Would your brother's practice need a nurse? You said you wanted to hide away from my parents, and I don't want to go back to per diem. Working at an ob-gyn's office would mean surrounding myself with new moms and babies. It sounds fun. We can talk to him." The others at the table started a conversation and now ignored them. Roy picked up his salad fork and poked at the greens on his plate. "Oliver said he liked how you both worked with our mother." His brother had exacting standards. She patted his lap like everything had been decided. "Then we have a plan for our future. One without love," he mumbled, unsure what else to say as the future sounded hollow without emotion. Though he'd never sought out feelings, Caitlyn heard him and sighed. "There's that, but that's not half as bad as living with my parents' judgment anymore. Shall we shake on this?" His gut twisted. Being a means to her goals left something out that he knew was missing, though he wasn't sure what to label it. She offered her hand and said, "Okay, but we still need to figure out the baby, and then we'll be straight and clear with each other." Her lie. His body whispered they could make her lie real, but that was probably just his lust talking. He wanted her. Somehow he had to find a way for his heart and mind to relax. Caitlyn was too good to let slip away, because he always suspected everyone until he thoroughly knew everything about them. He kissed her palm and intended to figure everything out fast and claim her. Perhaps tonight he'd show her how he felt. Chapter 7. Caitlyn let out a long sigh of relief the moment they entered the condo, and she slipped her high heels off. Her feet were sore from the 4-inch Pradas that she was no longer used to wearing. Roy closed the door and checked the lock. She stretched out her arms and said, "Tomorrow's the wedding. I'm already exhausted." "You are?" He took off his loafers. "I was hoping we could stay up and talk a little." The way his brown eyes gazed at her gave her tingles. She played with her diamond pendant. "Talk?" He came closer and she smelled his cologne that made her senses melt into butter. "Yes, we're finally alone." First, she had to clear her mind because this closeness made her forget the world. However, the thought that she had betrayed him buzzed in her mind like an annoying fly. She swallowed nervously and shook the thought away. The police had nothing on them as Roy was a good man. She stepped back and stared at his strong jaw and broad chest that made her body ache in ways she shouldn't think about as she said, "Ah, I see. Okay, let me change out of this dress. Give me 2 minutes." He tugged at his tie to take it off. "I'll open a bottle of Pinot Grigio. Sounds good." She waved at him, but then dropped her hand, feeling silly at the action. She hurried into her bedroom. As she closed the door, her heart raced. She wasn't sure what she'd change into that made sense. She'd never strut out in her lingerie. Roy's interest sent a jolt of energy throughout her body. Caitlyn decided against one of her beach cotton cover-ups that didn't flatter. She unzipped her green dress and picked out one of her cotton dresses she wore about the condo every day. Simple and feminine without clinging. Not sure this was enough, she dashed on a small amount of perfume and said a little prayer. Somehow she'd survive that stupid lie she'd told earlier. She never should have said that. The comments on her weight gain had irritated, and she'd reacted. For now, she squared her shoulders and headed out so Roy might help her fix the mess she'd created. She left the sanctuary of her bedroom and saw him outside on the balcony, his body silhouetted against the string of lights. She trekked across the condo and peeked outside. Their wine glasses were on the table, but Roy stood staring out into the ocean. His broad shoulders and tight butt made him the hottest man she'd ever seen. Off in the distance, she could make out the dark shadows of cruise ships on the ocean. She took a breath, but as she stepped outside, Roy turned toward her and flashed her that gorgeous killer-watt smile of his as he said, "You look great." If only this was just the two of them like it had been last night, and she hadn't messed up today. She joined him at the railing and stared out into the ocean too. "I like you without the tie and jacket. You're quite handsome, Roy. Thanks." He patted her back as he pulled away. She turned toward him, but he returned with 2 wine glasses. He handed her one. "Here you go." They both sipped and let the distant sound of the ocean fill the air. Her heart felt lighter already. "What do you want to talk about tonight?" He lowered the glass, letting it rest on the balcony as he said, "Our conversation at the wedding." Boom. She held the glass tighter in her grip. "Oh, you mean about the baby? I'm going to eventually have to fess up to my parents." He nodded like that was exactly what he intended to say, and added, "And everyone we know." The sting in his words hit her hard. She'd been stupid and careless and completely wrong. Yeah, it shouldn't have flown out of my mouth like that. I ordinarily don't lie. He picked up his glass and turned so their shoulders were touching as he said, "There is another option." Her heart beat a little faster, and her eyes widened as she glanced up at him and asked, "There is?" He then pressed into her and said, "We can go for it and try to have a baby." "What?" She almost dropped the glass as her entire body jolted. She took a sip to cover the fact that she'd almost spilled it. "Really? I thought we were a business deal." He set their glasses the balcony. "So, we can negotiate for this." Negotiate? She reached up for her necklace, but she'd taken it off. She wished she had something to grab, but instead she licked her lips and waited. "What did he mean by negotiate?" Roy asked. "What would you want? Want? Right now?" Her pulse zipped so fast she couldn't even settle on this conversation, but she reached out and brushed her hand on his shoulder. "Let me think first." Think. Yes, she needed to focus. She didn't want anything really other than Roy. He was sweet, kind, sexy, determined, and desirable, all built into one perfect body. But rather than answer and make herself vulnerable, she asked, "What exactly do you want, Roy?" His bulging biceps went on either side of her as he held onto the railing. He then leaned closer, so their mouths were inches apart. "I want you in my bed and for us to have a baby." Yes, yes, oh yes. No other words wanted to come out of her lips, but he didn't kiss her. He stared at her, and her skin was all jittery. She ached to reach out and hold him tight, but she couldn't. Not until she understood that she'd be with Roy forever. It wouldn't be fair to bring a child into the world otherwise. "Any gender?" He shrugged but still didn't move away or come closer to take a kiss. "Doesn't matter. I need someone to take over my law firm one day." Wait, her eyes widened in surprise. This wasn't what she expected, and what if her progeny opted for art or science or any other discipline? "So our baby must be a lawyer?" He laughed, reached beside her for the wines and handed hers back. He then held up his like-he'd toast as he said, "No, but they'll inherit the cash and my shares of oil profits." He clinked their glasses and sipped. She watched and glanced down his body to his unbuttoned shirt that showed off his six-pack abs. Heat coursed through her. She sipped like the wine might cool her down, but then she said, "And you want this baby with me?" He nodded. "You are my wife, and we've talked about staying together." Fair, true, but they hadn't had this conversation. She hadn't considered that he might want children at all. Her hand pressed against her lower stomach and imagined herself pregnant at the moment. The image was so vivid and in color that she agreed, swept away by the vision. "Okay, but I want a say in our baby's life. We're even in this. Fair." He took her empty wine glass, setting them back on the balcony. The need for Roy grew inside her, but she hugged her waist and looked up at him. If she was a mother, she'd be nothing like her own. And we're not going to tell him or her what to do every second of their lives. Roy returned to facing her, and both his arms went around her again as he said very clearly, "Once they are old enough to make decisions for themselves. Anything else you want? All of him. For the rest of her days." She might have run from marriage with Harry, but she wanted Roy. She ignored the alarms in her head that told her to stifle her next sentence, but she said anyhow, "I don't want us to talk about not loving each other anymore." His lips curled into a half-smile. "Fair enough. Is that it? This was it? They were agreeing to have a baby?" Her breasts and body were beyond ready for his touch as his kisses earlier only left her wishing for more. She pressed her hand on his chest. "One more thing." "What?" He didn't move at all. Her heart beat so fast she wasn't sure she could get out the words, but she needed to. She held his gaze. This wasn't a lie on her end, though for him it might be. She'd never tell him how she felt, but she was already in love with Roy. No other man might ever make her happy, but she held that back and instead glanced at the ground as she said, "I don't want everyone in your family to know all these details. Let them think we're happy and in love too." "Not a problem, Caitlyn." He closed his eyes and lowered his head toward hers. She lifted her head to meet him, and the warm air between their lips made her tingle already. She closed her own too and puckered her lips, but then stopped and said, "Lastly." "Yeah?" He paused a fraction of an inch from her. It was impossible to ignore her thoughts anymore. She wrapped her arms around his neck and said, "I want you, Roy. I want this more than anything else. I thought I should tell you. I want you too, Caitlyn." He pulled her so close that she could feel the hardness of his entire body, his rigid muscles and his manhood, now hers to touch and hold. But as his lips met hers, she forgot about everything else. All that mattered was that they were together. The rest of the world disappeared. Chapter 8. Hannah's naked body was warm and toasty as she curled into Roy's chest. Harry had never made her scream, ever. She hadn't realized a person might crave more than one round of sex. For a long time, she thought she'd loved Harry, and still did as a friend, but she'd clearly misjudged him because last night blew her past out of the water. Maybe admitting that she loved Roy made everything better. She wasn't sure, but she hummed to herself. She turned toward the ocean and the full moon that rose high above the dark waters. If she could sleep, she would, but adrenaline coursed through her. She sat up, holding the sheet to her breasts, and looked farther out to the ocean and the dark horizon. She glanced back at Roy with a pang. He was handsome and strong and protective and sweet and hot. He really was the whole package. He tugged on the sheet and reached out for her. She scooted closer but whispered his name. "Roy?" Without opening his eyes or moving really, he said, "It's still dark out, Caitlyn." So, he wanted to sleep. She probably should let him. She bit her lip for a moment and wanted to hold back as she settled against her pillow. But her heart beat too fast right now. She whispered and hoped he heard her as she said, "I don't want you to think that this is just because I want to be safe." Again, he didn't open his eyes, but his voice was clearer as he said, "Go back to sleep." Good advice, but she couldn't. While she couldn't tell him how she felt, she needed to be clearer with him. She kept her voice low as she said, "This is important. I've wanted to be your wife ever since I saw how dedicated you are to your family and how hard you work every day to prove their innocence." Finally, his eyes opened, and she could see into his warm brown depths as he asked, "Why would that impress you?" The mysterious song in her head that she hummed returned. "Honestly, Until she'd lived with Roy, she never had this lightness or any song on replay like this. But she was happy, and she smiled when she said, "Because your loyalty is even more impressive than how sexy you are." He propped himself up on an elbow and stared down at her. Her heart began a new patter as he asked, "Do you trust me, Caitlyn?" Yes. Her answer wasn't because they'd just shared a bed. It was because of his actions throughout this ordeal. He'd earned her trust and respect. He traced her face and neck, kissed her shoulder and asked, "Then how come you left your job in DC and married me, a complete stranger?" This question clearly bothered him. Her pulse zipped, but the quietness of the room made her focus only on his words. If she could tell him about the police, she'd feel better. But she'd promised, and hopefully her testimony had helped the police stop Jensen's friends already, that she owed Roy the truth, though her face heated as she finally admitted, "Hannah and Lois." His brow furrowed. What? She'd avoided telling him any of this because she hadn't wanted his judgment. What kind of woman left a life behind just to be with her friends? It wasn't much of a life, though she'd learned a lot about herself. And it was also time to speak with Officer Baxter and let him know that she was going to tell Roy about working with the police. She'd promised to keep it a secret, so she would wait until she formally quit, but she didn't want any secrets between her and Roy. "Hannah's my best friend." She wanted to go home without hurting her pride and admitting she'd lost her inheritance. He lowered himself down to look directly into her face. So, if he kissed her, they could both forget this. But the speed of her pulse meant she was nervous. She hoped for the song to return to her heart that she often hummed, but it wasn't there. She lowered her head and whispered like she spilled her darkest secret. "So Hannah and Lois were my only friends, and without them I'd be alone." His hand brushed against her cheek again, and she gazed into his warm eyes. She expected judgment, but instead she saw peace. The song returned to her head and heart as his sexy voice said, "So you married me to stay near your friends. Why didn't you tell me that the many times I asked you?" True, he had asked multiple times. She hadn't meant to evade. She curled her leg around his waist to keep him close as she said, "Because I sound weak, and you already think I'm weak." "I do?" He brushed her hair off her face, laying it on the pillow. She didn't move but nodded. "You must. I never want to leave the building. I'm happy when most people wouldn't be. And I was willing to accept the status quo with you." Was? Something changed? He asked, though she felt his erection between them growing. She kissed his cheeks, his forehead, his shoulders, his chest, and his lips as she said, "Yes. Every day since we've married, I've been more and more attracted to you, and I never told you. And it wasn't about safety. It was because I saw that you are truly a good person." Her body was warm and waiting for him. He didn't move, but instead said, "Thank you for telling me, and for the record, ma'am, you're not weak at all." "Never call me ma'am." With that, he kissed her, and she pushed the sheets and blankets off them. She wanted him, again and again, and never wanted to leave their cocoon. Birds chirped outside the window. Her eyes fluttered opened, and she hummed to herself as she sat up, alone in Roy's bed. In the distance, she heard the shower running. She reached out to the chair beside the bed and picked up her dress, shrugging it on as her husband turned the water off in the shower and strolled out to the bedroom, wrapped only in his towel. His strong body was still wet and showed off every contour of muscles. He walked to the bureau and chose a white shirt. She sat on the bed in her cotton dress. "Roy? Yeah?" He turned around, and that wicked grin of his meant he was thinking about last night. She scooted closer to where he stood as she stayed on the bed and asked, "Why are you okay with having me as your wife?" He tossed his shirt beside her, his underwear, and opened the closet, pulling out a pair of pants. With the clothes, he sat beside her and said, "Probably the same reasons as you." He tugged on his underwear. She watched him drop the towel on the floor, clearly not embarrassed. She shouldn't be either, though she stilled and asked, "Probably? Can you spell out your reasons more clearly?" He laughed as he saw her attention on his private parts, but then he winked and joked, "Yes, counselor." His tone became serious. "I wanted you. I had my doubts as your story made my head spin, but I wanted you." Jitters grew inside her because of this conversation. She'd never been this raw with baring herself to anyone, ever, though she hadn't uttered the word love. The undercurrent was there. This had to be enough. She took a deep breath and tried to sound rational. "Well, you have me. Anything else?" She cringed at the vulnerability she heard in her own voice with her question. He turned and let his leg rest on the bed as he edged closer to her. "And I knew you were a good person the day you volunteered to help my mother. I realized I'd cast you as a bad person, needing money or marriage to someone in jail. You proved me wrong. I'm a nurse." She was doing her job, and it wasn't meant as a romantic gesture. "It's the only skill I have, really." He squeezed her thigh gently. "But you could have stayed home and done nothing. The day someone tried to kill Ollie at the hospital, I was worried about my brother, but I immediately thought I'd failed you if something happened." Really? He'd been worried? She hadn't known that. She'd thought he'd showed up for his mother and brother, not her, though she'd glued herself to his side then. Perhaps if she had the permission from the police officer, she could tell Roy everything. Honesty would be good. For now, she wrapped her arms around his neck and hugged him as she said, "Oh, Roy." He kissed her, and they fell back on the bed. Heat coursed through her fast again. However, his phone rang, and they both sat and stared at it across the room in the charger. She adjusted her dress as he stood to check it, and she asked the obvious. "Who would call you this early? It must be important." His shoulders tightened as he grabbed the phone and held up his finger. "Hold on." He rushed across the bedroom and out the door as he said, "I'll be right back." Strange. She stood and found her underwear on the floor next to the chair. "I'll be here." Something big must have happened. She slipped into the bathroom and cleaned herself up, and by the time she returned to the bedroom, he stormed back inside and grabbed his pants. Who was it? He finished pulling his pants on and then took her hand. "Jake, Sam Zandy is headed toward our building. It's so early in the morning." Her mind went blank. Sure, her excuse made no sense even as she said it, but she was at a loss. He then waved at her and quickly threw his shirt over his head. "Yes, hurry and get ready fast. I need us to be prepared." Now ice raced through her. Roy never rushed around in the morning. "Where are Dylan and Lois?" He found a pair of socks and jumped to put them on as he said, "They are still out of town." She stood beside him. In the ER, she'd faced daily emergencies but rarely became emotionally involved. She hadn't liked her job then, but at least it kept her level now. "What can I do?" He placed his hand on her lower back, and they headed out together. Adrenaline now coursed for a new reason as he said, "Let's get the others and meet up with my parents. If something happens, it's better if we're together." The last time the building was attacked, they'd all hidden in various places, and it had been a nightmare. He was right. She grabbed her phone from the kitchen counter, realizing her battery was almost dead. As they left the condo, she quickly said as she typed, "Texting the wives, but they are probably still sleeping." He nodded and led her to the elevator as he pressed the button and said, "Can you knock on my parents' door and get them up?" If she went up, he was going down and her best friend was in the middle. "I'll stop at Logan and Hannah's too." As the elevator opened and he headed toward the staircase, she called out, "Hannah just texted back. I'll go straight up." He tapped the door frame and the stairs going down. "I'll get the others. Hurry." "Okay, see you soon." She ran into the elevator. This wasn't how she'd expected the morning to go, but it didn't matter. Roy needed to get up to her fast. He was right that they needed to be together and face whatever happened as a family. Chapter 9. Caitlyn made sure that Ava was calmly talking with Hannah and then went into the kitchen to raid the Bentley's refrigerator. Her hands shook when she was still, so she busied herself by making cinnamon rolls. While living in the commune, she'd discovered that baking helped her release stress. She kneaded the ingredients and focused on the dough, patting it until it was no longer sticky. Then she stirred the sweet topping that began to bubble on the stove. Officer Baxter hadn't answered his phone when she'd called, but it was early. She'd try again later, and maybe she'd see him when he came to help the Bentley family. She rolled the dough into a log and then sliced it and placed it on a tray, which she shoved in the oven. Cinnamon scented the air. The door opened and her heart raced as Roy and his two brothers, with their two wives and children, walked inside. He patted his brothers on the back and then joined her. She felt a jitter inside her, though she finished creating a second tray. "Roy, there you are. What are you doing?" He peeked into the oven to see her cinnamon rolls. He closed it and her heart returned to its normal speed while she washed her hands. I'm making breakfast while Hannah jokes with your mom. Roy took down the espresso maker and teapots from their spots on the shelves. I'll help you. Thanks. He'd make the drinks while she'd work on eggs. She took 2 dozen from the refrigerator. They moved in sync as they prepared to feed his entire family, which might double as a football team. Scrambled will be easiest with this many people. Agreed, Jake typed on his laptop with a fierce expression. Roy finished brewing tea and started on the espresso. Any news on Sam's location? Jake didn't even glance up. Not yet. The police don't have a file on him, so he's not considered a threat. Caitlyn paused and pursed her lips. That wasn't true entirely. She'd reported Sam to Baxter a year ago. He had all her notes on the guy. Jake continued typing, his fingers fluid. I'm glad Lois isn't here. Dylan's been talking to his wife, and from what I understand, she'd avoided Adam, but she also had issues with Sam. Lois's fears hadn't been something Caitlyn could report in its entirety, as Lois kept her thoughts to herself. Caitlyn returned to her baking, but Roy reached out and brushed against her shoulder. What do you and Hannah recall about Sam? Any skills we should know? Skills? Baxter needed to show up soon so she could quit and tell Roy everything, and he might have something about Sam in the reports she'd given him. Her skin felt jumpy, but she met Roy's gaze and answered as best she could. I remember he used to fix things around the camp. I usually kept to myself, to be honest, and modeled perfect behavior to avoid extra attention. You can blend. He let her go. Her insides twisted that she'd made a mistake in not telling him. She wished she felt better about her decision, but she was stuck between one promise and Roy's trust. True. What else? Roy wrote down the words handy and tools. The Bentleys had to know more. She went back to the kitchen and tried to put away the flour, but she banged it too hard in place, and some of the powder splashed up at her. She deserved more than flour in her face, but she ignored the rush in her veins and said, he carried a gun sometimes. Armed, Roy wrote on his pad of paper, and then he took out his phone and said, I'm texting security. Anything else? That he needed to keep his family safe. The police should have shared the files on all of this, and her mind couldn't fathom why they hadn't. She went to the sink to wash her face. I honestly don't know what he did with Reverend Jensen. I was too busy setting the tables or helping in the kitchen. He handed her a dry towel as he said, You are a good cook. I try to keep myself useful. She wiped her face, wishing somehow she could just focus on being with Roy and that none of these threats were real. Jake stood abruptly with his laptop. Security says Sam just entered the building. Roy blocked her like it was his nature to protect her. I still think we should have our security team kick him out. But then we don't learn what he intends to do, and if we might get any clues as to who is behind all of this, Jake said. This is the plan, remember? Avoidance was her usual plan. Her hands shook. She turned off the faucet and set the towel on the rack as she told Roy, I'll serve the coffee. No. He brushed his hand against hers and gently tugged as he said, You need to join the wives and children in the safe room. She needed to speak to the police, and she hoped Baxter was part of the team this morning. This way any doubts would be erased, and she'd tell Roy everything. She reached for the coffee pot to stall for time. After I make sure that everyone is served, he took the pot from her and put it back. She should have reached for the tea anyhow, as most of his family drank that instead, but she kept that to herself as he said, I'll ensure my brothers and father have what they need. Take the cups into the safe room with you. He handed her a bag of clear plastic cups, which she accepted with a small nod. I'm scared. We'll be fine. He kissed her cheek and directed her to join the others. With luck, the police would ask to speak to them. She held on to the hope that Baxter would seek her out as she walked into the safe room. Everyone was already there. The teenagers and the children were all playing music together in the back. Caitlyn passed Ava Bentley, who spoke animatedly with Rachel, and she plopped into the empty seat next to Hannah. Her best friend then turned and said immediately, Distract me, Caitlyn. What wouldn't she do for her friend? How? Hannah sat cross-legged and offered her some elastics to make bracelets like they were still teenagers. She then put the bag on the bottom of the bunk beds beside them and began to braid. You and Roy seemed closer this morning. She didn't want to talk about them. Caitlyn's face felt hot, but she picked up a few elastics and started doing the same thing in a semblance of normal. We're working things out. Hannah peeked at her. I'm happy if you're happy. I might be. Caitlyn hoped her own guilt ended today. Talking to the police would erase her one hurdle. Then maybe she had her shot at real happiness. An hour later, the door to the safe room opened, and Roy was the first to stick his head in. Caitlyn met his warm gaze and felt like he was the hot fudge on her ice cream. She stood and wanted to kiss him, but he helped his mother walk out the door as he said to Caitlyn, "You can come out now." Sam left the building and didn't touch anything or anyone. Drat. Did that mean the police were gone too? She walked out and only saw his brothers and his family. Did you get any clues then? From what I could see, no. But Jake and Dylan are analyzing Sam's behavior and digging for more. The detectives either never showed or had already left. Perhaps Baxter hadn't been here at all. They filed into the living area and she asked, "Did the police come?" "Yes, but they spoke with security and left," Jake said. Security said the officers were uninformative but nice. Baxter couldn't have been there then. She swallowed and stared at a grandfather clock that ticked as she asked, "Are you sure we should go to Harry's wedding?" "We don't have to on my account, just because my parents will be there." "He's my brother," Hannah said as she joined them. "I want to see Harry get married, but you don't have tone. We need to live our lives as normal people, and security has been tripled for today." Roy spoke like it was a command. "We'll be fine." "Okay then." She took Roy's arm as they walked to the kitchen to clean up from their cooking earlier. "So we can go home and get ready for the wedding?" Her stomach churned as she thought it was strange to act like nothing had happened. "Yes." He patted her hand and they finished loading the dishwasher. Sparks raced through her. If she stayed in Roy's arms, then she'd be happy, forever. She swallowed but kept silent as they said goodbye to his family. They made it back to their apartment in silence, but as he opened the door, he asked, "Did you pick out a tie for me today?" "Right, the wedding." They were going together. "I will. Give me 2 minutes to change. I'm wearing royal blue. You looked beautiful the other day in it." Roy stared at her with a sensual glint. "Matches your eyes." If he looked at her like that, she'd wear royal blue every day. Her cheeks heated as she walked toward her room. Halfway there, she stopped and asked, "Roy, yeah?" He paused in his own trek to his bedroom. A voice whispered she should tell him about the police, but she ignored it. Instead, she smiled at him and said, "I'm glad we're okay." Roy's face grew taut as his lips thinned. "I need to clear our names so we can go out in peace and confront these people before they do something else." Fair. And she needed to tell him the real reason why she'd followed Jensen and married Roy. Then they'd all be free. "Tomorrow, after the wedding, I know you can do it. I'm working through the files fast." He lifted his chin like she'd given him hope. True. The FBI files showed the entire case. Hopefully Roy and Harry would clear the record, and all the Bentleys would be proven innocent, like she knew they were. She changed into her party dress and quickly painted makeup on her face. After she'd brushed her hair, she returned to the living room. Roy held out 2 ties, but was already in a dark gray suit. She pointed to the one in his left hand as he said, "You look even prettier today. You'll outshine the bride." Warmth stirred in her belly. The way he looked at her made her believe anything was possible, though she waved off his comment. Doubtful, but thanks. Once he fixed his tie, they headed downstairs with security flanking them on all sides. They went to the lobby where Roy patted her arm and said, "Stay close when we run to the limo, and then when we get out at the other hotel." Okay. She realized she wasn't afraid with Roy at her side. Despite the danger, life was good. At the hotel lobby, they were flanked on all 4 corners, and the sound of people laughing or the sight of strangers mostly discussing a buffet or their plans for the day echoed in her ear until they made it safely inside the reception. The ballroom had been transformed into a royal castle. Roxy's theme was elegant, as the white and gold fabric that draped the walls surrounding paintings of the Italian countryside made Caitlyn think she'd entered some ancient Roman estate found in Tuscany. They went toward their white chairs, and she whispered to Roy, "Weddings are beautiful." Roy picked up her program that the usher handed him, and once they were seated, Roy asked her as he read, "You're okay with seeing Harry marry Roxy? Why wouldn't I be?" She took his hand and her heart beat a little faster from the spark as she said, "I have you." He kissed her fingers. "Would you want a wedding like this?" Good question. She looked around at the aisle decorated with honeysuckles and satin, aware of the danger outside. When she was at her parents' as a caged bird, she'd expected luxury like this. Though learning to cook over an open fire in the woods, she'd learned simplicity was even more beautiful. Luxury was nice, but not necessary for daily living, only if we were all free and clear. Honestly, I'd want something more low-key. Roy patted her hand like he understood when he probably didn't. He'd grown up knowing he was a prince. He'd probably expect a royal wedding with lots of blue and gold decadence. She beamed at him. Nothing was going to spoil her happiness. Roy brought his mouth next to her ear, his sexy cologne making her weak, until he whispered, "Here comes your mother." Her nose turned, and her lips pursed with dismay as her parents sat right next to her. "Mom, Dad." Her spine tingled as she scooted closer to Roy like he might protect her. Clearly, her mother had no idea how cold she made her feel, because Mom said, "This could have been your wedding, darling." Roy's fingers were interlaced with her own. She lifted their joined hands. "Mom, Roy's my husband. He's the best man I've ever met, and we're in love." Roy kissed her cheek. Her mother then smiled at her, and Caitlyn flinched at the sudden approval in her eyes as she said, "I believe you today." What had changed? Caitlyn was afraid to say anything. She held her head higher but couldn't quite move, as every part of her body was rigid except her hand in Roy's. "Not that I need your approval, but what changed? You're more sure of yourself today." Her mother leaned over her and tapped Roy's knee. Roy inched closer to her mother, and they both squished her a little as her mother said, "Young man, you weren't who we wanted for our daughter." And for some reason, Roy didn't even blink. He gave her a benign smile like he understood everything, and it was all right. Caitlyn's heart sped up fast, but Roy sounded calm and cool as he said, "I'm aware of that, ma'am, though I do swear I'm working to prove my brothers and I were set up." Roy was polite, and it was embedded in his veins. Her mother nodded like she was part of some big plan. "If you do that, we'll invite you both to our house for dinner." Seriously? Dinner? Her mother could have supported Caitlyn at any point for doing something on her own instead of constantly degrading every moment of independence she'd ever tried to make. If she and Roy did have children, she'd be sure to encourage them to be independent. Until she'd left Miami with Hannah, Caitlyn hadn't done anything independently except study for a degree her parents thought pointless. But she'd been a nurse to at least let her feel needed by others, even if it was only momentary. She tried to find the words as she said, "We don't need, we'll be delighted," Roy interrupted. Her lips thinned. There was no way he should be complacent or acknowledge her mother's weak acceptance that didn't mean anything. Then her mother asked, "Is it true you were royalty in your old country?" That was why she was willing to look past Roy and the newspapers. Now it made sense. Roy spoke with kindness as he whispered, "Yes, technically we still have the titles there as my father never abdicated. He left to protect us." Oh, she hadn't known that. Perhaps that was why he was being targeted so much. He wasn't just a former prince. Her mind swirled with that new information. Her mother patted her shoulder like she cared about her and asked Roy, "So technically my daughter is a princess?" He tipped his head. "Yes, ma'am." She'd never even considered that. Not really. And she shrugged it off now, hoping that the information she'd heard at the commune that she'd given to the police would help catch whoever was behind the movement to steal his family's wealth or crown. "Well, clear your name," her mother said with a stiff smile, as if they hadn't been trying their best already. "So we can announce your marriage to our friends." "Absolutely." Roy sat back in his seat while the music started. Roxy must be walking down the aisle. Everyone stood and watched the door. Caitlyn, angry, whispered to Roy, "Why were you so nice to my mom?" He brought her around to stand in front of him so she had a view, and spoke right in her ear as another thrill raced through her. "I want you and I to be happy together. Eventually you're going to want to speak to your parents again." He made her feel warm and wanted. She sighed and closed her eyes, wishing they were alone as she said, "I guess." He laughed like she said something funny and hugged her. "Don't worry. Everything will be fine. Maybe everything will work out." She stopped talking as Roxy and Harry faced each other at the dais. They both seemed so happy, and even though they were across from one another, the love in the air was tangible. Perhaps one day everyone would see that with her and Roy. Anything was possible, but being with Roy was all that mattered. She just wanted to be in his arms. Chapter 10. Caitlyn's heart felt light, and excitement coursed through her. She held her head higher and smiled as the bride and groom took their first dance as a married couple. She held her breath while standing next to Roy, the sexiest man she'd ever met. As the song continued, she was transfixed with watching Harry and Roxy. Harry had never seemed that joyful dancing with her. It was for the best that they'd never married. As the song ended, she clapped along with the rest of the guests. She then pressed herself into Roy's arm playfully, saying, "The wedding was beautiful." He held out his hand to lead her onto the dance floor as the next song played, and others were already heading out to dance. "It's good to see you happy." In his arms was the only place she wanted to be. She twirled when he directed and landed right back in his embrace like they'd practiced that move for years. She gazed up into his warm brown eyes and felt her insides already melting as she said, "I am happy. What about you? You seem especially joyful." He then led her into a new pattern, and not once did she step on his feet. She glanced over his shoulder and realized that he'd guided her away from someone who would have crushed right into both of them. Roy clearly had great focus as he admitted, "I've been working through the FBI case that they sent over. I found 3 major pieces of evidence that contradict. I've set a preliminary hearing date for tomorrow." This time she misstepped. She caught back up, but then squeezed his hand. It sounded like wonderful news, but she wasn't a lawyer. "What does that mean?" He pressed his head closer to hers without breaking the dance pose. His forehead against hers reminded her of last night and how they'd been together. His taste still lingered on her lips, and she wanted another kiss. "It means if the judge believes me, then we could be cleared of all charges." No wonder he was happy too. She threw her arms around his neck and hugged him, not caring if they danced at all as she asked, "Tomorrow? How? That seems so fast." He ran his hands down her side and then clasped her palms to lead her again as he said, "Fast? I've been working on this since we left prison, and it feels like it's taken much too long." They danced like they knew each other intimately, which they did, but now everyone would see that they were no strangers. She felt some heat in her cheeks at his possessive hand on her hip. "I just meant that you've been so busy with me this weekend I didn't realize you'd made progress." Roy expertly twirled her again. When she went back to his arms, he said, "I work on it every spare second, but once I had the file from the FBI, I couldn't stop. I saw major holes in the report, and I've been having my brothers help me put pieces back together." Everything he'd worked for in the past few weeks would finally come to fruition. This time, when she met his gaze, the rest of the world disappeared. It felt like they were all alone with only lights around them as they danced. She couldn't be more proud. "I'm thrilled for you," he whispered in her ear. "Keep this information to yourself. As long as nothing interferes, you might be dancing with a free man." And then the screech of the party and all the people laughing and joking and dancing around them came back in vivid color. She'd never interfere with his quest for freedom. "I hope so, Roy. Your mother will be so happy." His grin was contagious as he said, "We all will be. Are you ready to get out of here? Leave?" Her feet grew heavier as he led her off the floor. She pouted as she asked, "Already? They haven't cut the cake yet." He stopped and looked at her with confusion. "Do you want cake?" "Not particularly." She tightened her hold on his arm. It had been a long time since she'd had fun at a party, but with Roy, home was great. Roy's hand caressed her skin and left goosebumps in his trail up her bare arm. "Good, because we have to work on making what you said reality." Now that sounded promising. Her eyes widened, and she walked closer to him so no one else heard as she asked, "Oh, you mean the baby?" He looked her up and down, and she felt warm just from his perusal. "Yeah, unless you'd rather not?" Did she seem to him like she was disappointed or something? Roy made his own desires clear too. She tugged on his muscle to get his full attention and said, "No, I'm in. Let's get out of here. But first we need to say goodbye and not be rude." "You're probably right." He scanned the room. The bride and groom were clear on the other side. "Let's try and say goodbye to Harry and Roxy if we can." He took her hand and led her into the crowd. Someone elbowed her near her neck. Someone else shoved her and would have separated her from Roy if he hadn't reached behind to hold her tighter. She clung to his back like he was the battering ram, until finally she said, "That's proving impossible. Do you think they'd miss us if we left?" He stopped, and less people pummeled into them as they made their way toward the bride and groom with cell phones in hands. Roy said, "They have over 200 guests. I doubt they'd notice. Then let's just go." She pulled him away. They'd see Harry and Roxy soon. There was no need to get black and blue marks for her efforts. As they made their way across the room in the other direction, another voice that was always the sound of doubt in her mind said, "Darling, there you are. Mother?" She turned, hoping somehow she was wrong. However, the blue eyes of the woman who'd chosen her friends for her and insisted she wear dresses that she'd picked out stared back at her. Her mother then waved her father over. They were so close to the exit, but right now it seemed miles away. Roy stood tall, but internally Caitlyn felt like she was soup about to boil over. Her skin was itchy as her mother said, "I was speaking to your father and we don't want to wait." Her mother then gazed at Roy like he was the best person she'd ever met, and instead of making her happy, her stomach was in knots. "We were rude to you yesterday, Mr. Roy Bentley. Please come to our house for dinner tomorrow." No. If they went to dinner, her mother might whisper rude comments to her friends over her daughter's choice of a husband, and Caitlyn wouldn't put Roy in that position. "Mother, Roy has a busy day Monday." Without blinking, her mother then amended her statement and implored Roy. Then Tuesday, Caitlyn moved to protect her husband, but Roy reached out and kissed her mother's hand. "Tuesday will be lovely. Thank you." What? He seriously didn't need to appease them. They had no rights. She fanned her hot forehead. "Okay. Bye, Mom, Dad." Her mother pulled her in for a hug. "It's good to see you happy, Caitlyn." Something had happened. Something big. What? Her parents never changed their minds, ever. The 2 times in life she'd tried to take a pet home, her parents had returned the dog and the cat without a care for her tears. But somehow they were over Roy's criminal arrest? This didn't add up. She didn't say a word and walked with Roy out of the hotel, flanked by security. However, as they slid into the back seat of the limo, she bumped right into her phone. She picked it up with a shrug. She hadn't noticed it gone. "Oh, I must have left the phone in the limo. Glad the first found it." Roy picked up his phone to check his messages, though he pointed to hers. "Looks like you have a message." "Oh." She quickly pressed the listen button. Her breath caught in her throat as she heard, "This is Officer Baxter. Sorry I've been away from my desk. Call me when you get this message." Finally, he'd called her back, but this was so not the right time. She almost dropped the phone like she had butter for fingers. Caitlyn slid the device into her bra, hoping that Roy wouldn't press. Roy put his own phone away in a fluid motion while he asked, "Who was it?" Lying wasn't good. She needed to tell him. She steeled her spine and told herself to stop the small trembles inside her tummy. A police officer I gave a statement to on Sam Zandy and Adam Lepore back when we were living in the forest." His eyes widened. "You gave the police a statement on them." Now he'd ask her more questions and probably put together everything. He had a right to know, but she needed to tell the police she wasn't going to bother to spy on any of the Bentley brothers. She fixed a wayward curl as she said, "Back when I was living on the commune, I was trying to get my files from the officer. When you and your brother said the police had no records on them, that isn't true. They have my witness statements. Why didn't you tell me before? I'm sorry. I should have. I'll have Jake dig it up," Roy said like that ended the conversation. Her heart slammed against her chest. If he investigated, he'd find out that she was helping them before she had a chance to quit. She shook her head as she said, "No, no," he repeated in a clueless tone. What mattered was the 2 of them. Together. She stopped moving her head and instead led his hand to her back for him to hold her tighter as she said, "I mean tomorrow. Tonight, we have plans." He traced her backside, cupping her butt and leading her to sit on his lap. "So you want me?" Once she was on top of him, she circled his shoulders and held herself closer, breathing the same air. "Absolutely. If we stay this happy, it's possible we could both fall in love and live happily ever after." He didn't move, though she felt the stirring of desire under her as he asked, "Is that what you want?" The limo stopped. "It's better than a marriage of convenience, no?" Roy helped her get down and she opened the limo door. Security was waiting for them. As she stepped out, she adjusted her dress so it wasn't bunched around her thighs. Roy followed her out and took her hand while he said, "I just like to see you happy." She waited until they crossed the lobby and entered the elevator, alone. Security finally gave them some peace. Her heart lifted as they entered their condo again. The second he closed the door to lock it, she said, "I'm ready. Let's make that baby." His eyes widened while he took off his shoes at the door. She kicked off her designer heels too, and then ran her hand down the back of his pants, feeling the hard muscles flex under her fingers. He took her hand while he led her forward to his room. "Caitlyn, sometimes it's like there is something bothering you that you're suppressing, and sometimes you're just so happy." Innocence wasn't her pretense, but in his arms she forgot everything else. She waited as he opened his bedroom door, and finally she asked, "What do you prefer?" He leaned forward and claimed her lips. They both knew she was his, heart, body, and soul now. His kiss was like a branding that she wanted to continue receiving the rest of her life. When he let the kiss end, he said, "That you keep stirring up my life like this. Good, now let's go." She unzipped her dress, heading for his bed. He closed the door, letting her see his muscular chest and abs while he unbuttoned his white shirt, displaying smooth skin. Tonight they were together. Tomorrow they'd work out everything else, but right now, she was his. Chapter 11. Today was going to be a great day. Roy glanced down at the white sands of the beach and the clear blue water. He turned from the window, holding his coffee cup, and stared at Caitlyn with her blonde hair spread over his pillow and her cute upturned nose on her relaxed face while she still slept in his bed. Someone rang the doorbell and security beeped his phone. Roy adjusted his suit jacket that he'd wear to court today and grabbed his light blue tie and headed out. Security quickly sent a message that the police officer's identification checked out. Miami PD wasn't part of his discussion at the courthouse today, so he had no idea why an officer might visit him now, unless it had something to do with Jake requesting Caitlyn's witness statement. Caitlyn's admission surprised him, but now she started making sense to him, and he'd have cooperated if he'd been in her shoes. Either way, he wasn't sure why an officer might show up today, of all days. They hadn't broken any parole, though hopefully soon they'd all be free of supervision. He unlocked the door, and Officer Baxter, a man with bright blue but beady eyes and pepper-colored hair, showed him his badge. "I'm here to see Caitlyn Cooper." Caitlyn? His eyes widened. She'd never do anything illegal. Maybe Baxter was her contact, so he'd stay close. He pointed the officer into his office and said, "I'll get her for you." "Thanks. I need to speak with her alone." He stuffed his badge back on his belt and headed into the office with an arrogant swagger. Roy ignored that and entered his bedroom. Caitlyn was awake and stretching on the bed. He closed the door so the officer didn't hear any of their conversation and kept his voice low when he said, "Caitlyn, a police officer is here for you." Her brow wrinkled as she stood up from the bed, grabbing the light blue dress he'd brought for her as she asked, "Me?" "If he's here about your witness testimony and wants your consent, I get it." He nodded while she threw it on and fluffed her hair. "But we need to be fast as I have to go to court. Don't tell the officer anything about my court hearing." "Not a problem." She was ready in under a minute. "Where do I go?" He walked out with her. "Why don't you use my office as he wanted to speak to you alone?" In the hall, Roy was sure the officer could hear them. His frustration at the cocky way the man had entered his home made Roy intend to stay right outside the door, ready to defend Caitlyn. Today, Roy would free his family from having to accept the police showing up unannounced like this and then accepting without question. Caitlyn took his hand and said, "Roy, Her voice trailed off. Perhaps she didn't want to be overheard. He hugged her and asked fast in her ear, "Yeah?" Her cheeks paled like she was about to step in front of a firing squad. He understood. Ever since his false arrest, talking to the police about his family gave him pause too. She took a deep breath and said, "Give me 5 minutes. Then come in and join us." "Should I come in now?" "No, 5 minutes." He'd not let her face anything alone. They were together now. He nodded. Body rigid, Caitlyn walked into the office. She didn't entirely close the door behind her as she held out her hand and said, "Officer Baxter, what are you doing here?" Roy fixed his tie and intended to give her privacy when he heard the officer say, "You were supposed to report any criminal activity the Bentleys might be involved in." His heart nearly stopped. Caitlyn was the spy? He'd been that much of a fool? She'd told him last night, but he thought that was about the commune and Jensen, not his family. Wow, he was clearly stupider than he thought. He held still behind the door. Caitlyn's voice pitched higher as she said, "They aren't involved in anything illegal that I can see," and she didn't deny it. Adrenaline coursed through him as his ears buzzed. Baxter then spoke softer. "You used to write detailed notes for me." Roy's vision swam and his head was so hot he might explode. She'd lied to him. How many times had he asked her why she'd married him, and she'd denied ever being involved? Over and over again, she'd lied. She squeaked out, "There is nothing to see here." At least there was that. She saw they were innocent because they were, but she hadn't trusted him. Betrayal pumped in his veins as the officer told her, "You claimed you were marrying the lawyer to help us keep an eye on these criminals." This time, Caitlyn's voice grew louder. "There is nothing to report. The Bentleys are good people. Even if he wasn't standing behind the door, he'd have heard that." A jolt ran through him. Standing here eavesdropping was stupid. He backed off and straightened his tie. He could still hear everything because the officer said, "Or you're blind to the truth. Did they pay you off after you swore you wanted to protect your friends from their own mistake in marrying criminals?" Stunned, she'd wanted to marry him to get information. Roy stumbled toward his bedroom, though he heard Caitlyn say in a harsh voice, "No, it's plain that the family was set up. Roy's working hard today to prove his family's innocence. What evidence does Roy have?" "I don't know." He stopped short. At least she hadn't mentioned the FBI file. It was something. The last thing Roy needed was for anyone else to interfere with his hearing today. If the officer was connected to Curnow, then who knows what other manufactured evidence might suddenly appear, and it was possible. Roy's mind clicked. All the lies were already there, so what was a bunch more? His skin radiated with disgust that Caitlyn met with a dirty cop, right here in his own home. Officer Baxter's words were laden with disdain. "So you're helping criminals escape the law. I never should have picked you. You weren't desperate enough." The Bentleys are innocent. The stomp of feet meant their conversation was over. The office door swung wide, and Roy briefly saw the officer's foot as Caitlyn said, "Officer Baxter, I'm going to tell Roy and his brothers everything I told you about Adam Lepore and Sam Zandy." Roy's ears buzzed. She'd told him that she needed to talk with Hannah before getting him information that she already had. Why had she delayed? More lies, and he'd been the fool who'd believed her. Officer Baxter said, "You never found enough for a conviction on those two either." Roy came into view, and Caitlyn's face was bright red, her strawberry blonde hair down around her shoulders. She clutched her stomach as she said to Baxter, "I'm done. That's what I wanted to tell you." The officer saluted her and strutted past Roy as he said with heavy sarcasm, "Good luck with everything." Whoever Baxter was, he more than likely wanted to arrest Roy, who walked behind the officer and locked the door after he left. Steam would probably explode out of his ears like in one of those cartoons from childhood if he let go of his emotion. His heart sped up as he turned and faced Caitlyn. She took an audible breath. The adrenaline that pumped into his veins showed no signs of slowing. He needed to tell her that he knew. Her game was over. "Caitlyn," she opened her arms and let out a sweet sigh. "Roy, I need to talk to you." "Talk?" He crossed his arms and stayed a foot away. He never wanted to see, talk, or touch her again. Too bad. She flung her hands to her side, and her face went white as she asked, "Why? What's wrong with you?" She flinched as she stared at him. This needed to end as red-hot fury threatened to overtake his logical mind. He stayed back as he said, "I overheard everything." She covered her lips and her gaze grew glassy as she asked, "What?" "You were working for the police the entire time." He turned to put his shoes on. She closed the gap between them and stood to his side as she said, "I'm not the spy you're looking for. I never said an ill word to Baxter about any of you." Her nearness made goosebumps grow on his arms, but he ignored it. He was the fool for that reaction, so he knelt down and pulled on his Italian loafers. "Why not? You lied to me about why you married me." She trembled like a witness on the stand about to crumble. Not exactly. He stood, blocking her rose scent. I asked you multiple times why you married me. I knew your story was missing something, but not once did you mention the police. She pressed her palms against the arm of his suit jacket. I was trying to help Hannah, who really believed she was out to save her soul. I told you that. Finally, her story made sense. At least his mind rested that he'd been right. But that didn't make him feel better. He lifted his eyebrow like he did when he caught someone on the stand in the midst of their testimony that said something different than the previous record. So you could play hero? She ran her hands through her light blonde hair and clutched her heart. Was it wrong to want to do something honorable? I didn't lie to you. It wasn't until I left home that I learned to make my own choices. When the police offered me a chance to help them, I jumped at the opportunity to remain with Hannah and Lois and possibly catch a criminal. I wanted to make a difference for people I care about. He reached for the door. Her speech was too much. Well, I hope that you are satisfied. No. She touched his arm. Wait. I knew within a week of being here that your family was innocent and that Hannah and Logan had the real thing between them. I also saw right away that you had integrity. It's why I fell. His temples began to throb. Years of training helped him block out the fire in his veins as he said, I have to go. I'm already late. He stepped into the hall. Good luck in court, she whispered after him. The softness in her voice made him pause. He turned around and nodded at her. He'd trusted her and opened up when he never had with anyone before. At least she hadn't told Baxter about the FBI files or his plans for the hearing today. He let out a small sigh and said, You and I will talk when I get back. She closed the gap between them. I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier, but I'd promised not to. Security saw them, and Roy didn't want an audience. She hugged him, but he didn't hug her back. She met his gaze with an earnest expression. And I'll finish the list about everything I know. That's at least useful. His hand brushed against hers automatically. He pulled away and headed toward the elevator. She called out as he hit the button. I wanted to tell you, but you didn't. The ding of the elevator rang in the air. Roy went inside while Caitlyn stayed in the doorframe of the condo. I wanted to quit first. The snap in his brain made him retort as the doors started to close. Sounded like you were fired. Her cheeks flamed red, the doors slammed shut, and he pressed the button to descend. As he went down, he ignored how his stomach was hard as rocks. He shouldn't have twisted the knife. Caitlyn had no idea she'd ripped out his heart. He didn't even know he had won, until now. The doors opened to the lobby, and Jake walked with him to the waiting limo. As they went inside, Roy took out his case notes on his phone and read. Jake coughed. Roy glanced over and his brother said, Roy, you look stressed. It's nothing. Roy tried to focus on his notes. Jake lightly smacked him on the shoulder and said, Well, keep your head in the game. Harry's meeting you at the courthouse. We all want to get out of being constantly on parole. It felt more like house arrest. Roy put his phone down and turned toward his brother. An Officer Baxter just left my apartment. Jake folded his hands between his legs. What did the officer want? I can't talk about it now. I need to focus on the hearing first. His wife was the one who'd sent a shockwave through him. Roy wasn't ready to talk about it, though. Maybe never. So he pocketed his phone and said, So let's just clear our names and we'll move on. We're all depending on you, Roy, Jake said. This was why Jake was a great corporate negotiator and why Roy had brought him today. If anyone heard anything unexpected, and even though he wasn't an attorney, Jake was the second best at picking up anything that might be useful to the hearing. Roy swore he'd get his head in the game as he said, I won't let my family down. And he meant it. The words were a personal statement. He swore to himself he'd not think about Caitlyn until he came home. Right now he had work to do. Chapter 12, Caitlyn paced the condo after Roy left for the courthouse. Every time she neared the bedroom door, she remembered last night and how happy she'd been in Roy's arms. She turned and then recalled the conversation in the office. The repetition of the morning and how Roy must have overheard the whole thing between her and Officer Baxter made her stomach sink. She needed to breathe. This condo felt too small. Even in her own bedroom, the ache of loneliness and the solitude made her head spin. She swallowed and finally took out her phone. Who could she call? Her parents would be no help. Waiting for Roy's return wasn't going to work. Her entire body was hot, and tension racked every muscle. This was all her fault for not telling Roy sooner. If she didn't get out, her stomach would be a pretzel, and she wouldn't think rationally. Exercise usually cleared her mind. She walked to the balcony, but the memory of kissing Roy out here rocked her. Lying was never her, but lately that's all she'd done. She went inside and locked the balcony door, then scooped up her phone from the charger on the table and quickly texted, "Hannah, can you come downstairs? I need company." If Hannah didn't answer, Caitlyn didn't know what she'd do. She paced again, but nothing gave her peace here. Every inch of this condo reminded her of Roy and how she'd hurt him. Luckily, her phone rang, and she answered her best friend on her first ring and said, "Hello, Caitlyn, are you okay?" Hannah answered back fast, "You've never asked me to come down like that before." True. Though best friends, she couldn't just show up at Hannah's door where Logan might hear everything. Caitlyn sighed and said, "I just need a friend. Be right down." Hannah hung up. Caitlyn clutched her stomach. She needed to clear her mind and figure out how to fix this while being honest with herself. The past year of living on her own hadn't helped her, except for learning to cook. She went into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Even after leaving the commune, she'd fed Lois and Hannah every day because it was a small way to keep her friends close, so she had people. Somehow along the way, she'd turned into a liar. And that needed to stop. It was time to straighten out everything and accept the consequences. Caitlyn let her head rest on the nearby window near the refrigerator that overlooked the ocean below and breathed deeply. Then she took out the mixer and poured flour, sugar, eggs, butter, and vanilla into the bowl. Security paged her phone and she saw on the screen that Hannah had arrived. She jumped away from the window and ran to open the door, letting Hannah in and waving off the guard. Once the door closed, Caitlyn immediately hugged her friend. Hannah patted her back and slipped out of her black flip-flops that she left near the door. When the hug ended, Caitlyn felt tears on her face. Hannah's eyebrows rose as she asked, "What happened? I have to tell you something." Caitlyn led her friend over to the couch. Hannah slid back against the cushion and waited for Caitlyn to join her on the other end of the sofa. "What?" Caitlyn's heart raced. She jumped out of the seat and headed to the adjoining kitchen and opened the refrigerator, with her gaze quickly landing on the chocolate chips. She could finish making cookies to keep busy. So she pulled out salt and a splash of milk to finish off her recipe and turned the mixer on to spin. "I didn't go with you when you wanted to follow Reverend Jensen because I believed in his religious ideas." Hannah joined her in the kitchen. "Then why did you come with me?" She turned the oven on and prepared her pan as she said, "I thought you were making a big mistake. I also wanted to escape my wedding to your brother." Hannah found scissors in a drawer next to the refrigerator and opened the chocolate chips, handing them over for Caitlyn to add the chocolates into the bowl of cookie dough. Hannah poured them coffee as Caitlyn finished and asked, "Okay, so why is this relevant now? Harry's happy. You're happy with Roy." Caitlyn stopped and didn't move, just stared into the batter as she said, "Because I made a deal with the police to report anything I saw at the commune." Hannah's face went white. "What?" Caitlyn exhaled. "I wrote extensively about Adam Lepore and Sam Zandy, who I suspected was up to no good last year when I overheard a plan to get their hands on more money than your cash and jewelry was worth." Hannah spooned batter onto a cookie tray. "Wow, why didn't you tell me? You still believed in Jensen. I was waiting until you saw the truth on your own." Hannah didn't look at her with hate or run away. Caitlyn's face felt hot, but she finished telling her friend the rest. "And I promised the police I'd marry Roy and report what I saw." Hannah stopped making cookie circles. "Wait, they asked you to do that?" Her lawyer family training had obviously rubbed off on Hannah. "No, I volunteered because I didn't want you to get taken advantage of," Caitlyn said. "I hadn't met Roy yet, and you hadn't met Logan. I thought I was doing something good with my life." Hannah put the final drop of cookie dough on her tray. "You need to tell Roy. He knows everything," Caitlyn said defensively. But the last thing she needed was to shut the conversation down. So she took a deep breath and said, "I intended to tell him after I told the police officer I quit, but he overheard." Hannah wiped her hands on a paper towel. And this wasn't the part she wanted to talk about. However, the heat in her face rose even higher as told her best friend about Officer Baxter and Roy overhearing everything before he had to leave this morning. And now Roy hates me and thinks I lied. I don't know what to do. Caitlyn handed her the pan of cookies she'd made. Hannah sighed and opened the oven. You're going to have to face him. Drat. Caitlyn's heart already raced as she set the tray and centered it perfectly in the middle of the oven. That's not my strong suit. Caitlyn closed the oven door and leaned back against it, her arms crossed. She'd run from her parents, run from Harry, but Hannah was right. It was time to grow up and face Roy. Hannah looked her in the eye and said, "It's for the best." Caitlyn set the timer and rolled her tense shoulders at the thought she'd ruined everything. She winced. What if he never wants to see me again? Hannah patted her on the upper arm. Then you deal with that. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. The image of her sitting on the beach all alone with no one beside her rocketed through her mind. Loneliness had never been her friend. I don't know if I can. Hannah winked at her with a chuckle. You can. I have faith in you. Somehow, she needed to explain to Roy that she'd been in love with him. The thought hit her like a bullet going to her temple. No wonder she'd acted crazy. She met her friend's confident gaze and said, "Okay, I guess. I just need to get out of here and clear my mend for an hour." Hannah crossed her arms and shook her head. That's dangerous. Soon, they'd all be free from the police's ever-watchful eye. For all she knew, they might be already, and Caitlyn had never been a suspect or a target for the Bentley family. Even if Roy's enemies came for her, they had no proof the Bentleys would even care. Caitlyn looked around the room and memories were everywhere like living ghosts. She turned to Hannah. I can't be here and look at everything that reminds me of how much I screwed up. Caitlyn walked with her friend to the door and stopped to put on her shoes. Hannah slipped her flip-flops back on and asked, "Where are you going?" Caitlyn put her beach shoes on as she made up her mind. I'll take security, but a short walk on the beach will help and I won't actually leave the property. The beach is blocked off, just for residents. Hannah's lips pursed as Caitlyn opened the door. Do you need me to go with you? Caitlyn held the door partially open and turned around to meet her friend's concerned expression. No, you can see me from your window if you're worried. And besides, I need you to tell Roy if he returns that I'll be right outside. I'm not running. They walked to the hall, and Caitlyn quickly told the guard her plans. He spoke to someone on his earphone. Once Caitlyn turned and locked the door, Hannah said, "Caitlyn, whatever happens, it will be okay in the end. You and Roy were so happy, in a way I never saw you before." Happy. She'd known what she had with Roy was different than with Harry, but she hadn't labeled it. Her heart beat faster that she'd really ruined everything as she deflected the conversation. I don't have your easygoing manner, Hannah. You and Logan are the real deal. Security walked behind them toward the elevator. Hannah said, I need you around here as my nurse, you know. Caitlyn stopped and didn't push the button to call the lift. Wait, what? Hannah beamed like she was the happiest person ever and practically floated on air while she said, I'm pregnant. Besides my husband, you're the only other person I want in the hospital with me, and rumor has it that you're pregnant too. That was a lie I said to my parents that went way overboard. Roy didn't out me, but I'd love to be your nurse. Caitlyn hugged her tight. Her best friend was so sweet. Once she let go and pressed the elevator button, she said, I've been meaning to ask Oliver about working with him at his clinic when he reopens. Hannah gently patted her shoulder. Good. Please, when you are ready, apologize to Roy. Yeah, okay. Caitlyn agreed, but remembered how they'd been so indifferent to each other for weeks. It wasn't until after his mother went into remission that they'd opened the lines of communication with each other. With her actions, they could be back to square one. Hannah waved and took the staircase up a level. The elevator opened and 2 security officers flagged her on both sides and went inside with her. They descended into the 3-story lobby that reminded her of a modern-day castle with crystal and white marble, and then headed toward the back door and the direct access to the beach and Atlantic Ocean. One guard stayed at the door. The other followed her on the beach. The sun beat down on her head and drenched Caitlyn in heavy humidity that felt like a swamp, though it lessened to blazing heat the closer they stepped onto the sand. She turned and saw her security guard wore a blue jacket and black pants. He wasn't ready for the beach, so she said, We'll be fast. I just need a few minutes to clear my head. He looked around the beach with a frown on his face, like it was his permanent state. "I don't think this is wise, ma'am. Emotionally it is," Caitlyn said. 10 minutes was all she'd need. Hopefully. Maybe less. The sound of the waves always calmed her. She headed toward the surf and just sat, hugging her knees to her chest. Asking for forgiveness felt impossible. But the steady sound of the waves somehow made her stomach less queasy. The heat of the day didn't bother her as the breeze whisked it away, along with some of her tension. She stood to go inside and brushed the sand off the backside of her dress. Sam Zandy came from nowhere and banged a metal pipe on the back of her security guard's head. The other guard at the door was down on the ground too. Her spine tingled. She jumped, ready to run as she screamed, "Sam!" He stepped over the unconscious body of her security guard and grabbed her wrist. "You're going to get me in the building unseen." "Absolutely not," Caitlyn said. Roy already thought she was a spy. She wasn't about to help the very people who had it out for his family. Sam motioned toward his waist, and her gaze landed on the gun he had holstered to his side. "I'll kill you and your security guard, and ensure no one ever finds the bodies if you don't." Her heart beat fast. No one was around them on the private spot on the beach. She glanced down at the guard. He was hurt, and it was her fault. Without waiting for an answer, Sam dragged her toward the building like she'd agreed. He'd stolen the security guard's swipe key and used it to unlock the door. "What do you want?" Sam shoved her inside and into the darkness of a back room as he said, "I need your husband's computer files before he returns from the courthouse." She dragged her feet and latched onto a nearby potted palm tree like that might hold her still. "No." He closed the door and grabbed her arm like she was a package of flour instead of flesh and blood. "Let's stop pretending you have a backbone when you don't." She wiggled like she'd find a way to get free as she said, "Let me go." He proved just how boneless she was when he squeezed her arm and pushed her forward. "Now be a good girl and walk through this lobby, just like you walked out." No. Somehow she needed to break free of him. She'd not hurt the Bentleys or be a part of any plan to steal Roy's computer. She dragged her feet, unsure of what to do. "This won't work." He directed her toward the back elevators and pushed her again as he said, "Oh, it already has. Why is his computer so important?" She tried to pull back. If she ran forward, no one was in the lobby to beg for help. The security guard looked like he was barely 20 behind the front desk, and no match for Sam. The police force wasn't outside. What could that mean? She was on her own while he pressed the elevator button and then shoved her inside once it opened. "He's connected to his family's network and I need access." Perhaps once in the condo she'd have access to help. Her phone was near the door. She could run into the safe room. The plan made sense as she stood a little straighter and said, "You helped frame him and his brothers." Sam grabbed her arm and pushed her into the metal doors that opened, scraping against her skin. "Hurry! We don't have a lot of time before he returns from the courthouse." One mistake after another. One lie after another. Despite their attraction, perhaps Roy was better off on his own. Caitlyn would leave, as this was clearly her fault, without a fuss and not take a dime from him. Sam dragged her across the hall and opened the door with her key. She held her head high as she said, "When Roy is free, there is nothing stopping him from going after you and Adam and anyone else at Kerno. Except you." He laughed. As he pulled her into the condo, she felt the quiet and peace of their home disturbed by this madman. And the air smelled burnt. Drat. She'd forgotten about the cookies, which would be burned by now. Maybe if her cookies smoked, then the fire alarm might go off and alert security. There was no way Sam would let her go now. Everything was her fault, and somehow she needed to get Sam out of the apartment, or at least get him arrested and gone before Roy returned. The door slammed behind her and she flinched. The better plan was to get out of this alive. From there, she'd figured out what to do before her bravery deserted her. Chapter 13. Caitlyn's heart raced, but she needed a clear head to survive Sam Zandy in her condo. She had ER training to deal with emergencies. While Roy had no guns in the house, she knew every nook and cranny. The most important thing was to get to the safe room if there was any danger. She clutched her stomach and stalled in the kitchen. She'd automatically raced to turn off the oven. Now if she could hurry across the apartment to her room, she had a shot to ride this invasion out. Sam stomped toward her too fast though, and dragged her into Roy's office, taking her with him, his grip on her elbow. "Stay, don't move," he typed on Roy's computer as he said. "No one's coming for you. Distract him." She inched toward the office door. Sam didn't notice, intent on the screen. Caitlyn took another step. "Roy will be home soon." Sam tossed the office chair backward, letting it slide across the floor as he said with a malicious grin, "I've done what I needed to do." Goosebumps grew on her body as she turned ice cold. She winced. Had he done something to Roy's computer files? Would it affect the rest of the family? Go then. He took a step toward her and she took one back, but she realized fast that he'd outpace her if she ran. Somehow, she needed to figure out how to get a head start. He came forward while she hurried back. Sam laughed. "Blondie, I've wanted to pay you back for the past year." "Wait." Her lips pursed as she swallowed and asked, "Year? What did I do to you?" Sam caught her and grabbed her arm. "Did you think you were getting away?" Her face contorted in pain, though she knew better than to say a word. He then took another step out of the office and toward the living room as she dragged her feet and tried to sound brave. "Look, taking me with you will hold you back from escaping, and we both know it. For all you know, the guard might have woken up by now. Maybe someone stumbled over him and called his firm." His laugh was like a knife that pierced her skin and left her bleeding. "Good point, Blondie. Let's hurry." Somehow, she needed to get away from him. She twisted out of his tight grip as she screamed, "No, leave me alone." Near the door, she lurched for her phone. He grabbed her thigh and tugged her backwards as he asked, "Were you reaching for your phone?" The vein in his forehead pulsed. She gulped fear as she lowered her head. "I wish I'd thought of it sooner." He squeezed her leg tighter. "You're a liar." "Ew, no," and she was done with lies and liars now. If he reached higher, he'd touch her unmentionables. She tugged her dress down. "Don't do that. I'm married." "You care for Roy? That's why you betrayed Baxter?" He jerked his hands away and crossed his arms. Caitlyn backed up again. She needed to escape. The safe room was closer, but so was Sam. Betray Baxter? What did that mean? She continued to walk backward as it dawned on her with horror. She'd been betraying the Bentley family after all. Sam squeezed her arm, digging his fingers into her flesh as he stopped her escape. "He's been on our payroll since the beginning." "I've been helping you?" She felt sick as he dragged her toward the front door. He reached for the handle. "Yeah, you weren't smart enough to catch on, were you?" "Let me go," she screamed and used her knee to try to kick him in his manhood. He blocked her knee and then held it closer to his chest, mocking her attempts at getting free. She squirmed, but he licked her face. Her insides twisted, and she pushed him off as she said, "Ew, stop." "You'll like it." He squeezed her leg. This wasn't going to happen. As he held her one leg, she swung the other to knee him again. He let her go, but as he stomped to catch her, he crushed her phone that had somehow landed on the floor in the struggle. She knew she didn't have enough space to dash by him. Somehow, she needed to create more distance. He stepped closer and she could smell the garlic in his breath as he said, "You can't escape me." "Stop," she said as he grabbed for her again. He pointed toward the door. "Let's go. The car is waiting for us." Once again he reached for her, and she jumped another step out of his way as she screamed, "I said let go of me." He caught her and yanked her like she was a rag doll. "You're not strong enough to fight me. We went through this, remember?" Without thinking, she swung her leg like she'd learned some karate move. "No, we didn't actually." To her surprise, she kicked him in the lower belly and he bent over double. All those hours pacing an ER room left her legs strong. Good. She raced away from him and made it halfway to her bedroom when he grabbed her hips and pulled her back. He tugged her so hard she feared she'd break in half as he shouted, "What? Let go." She twisted again. This time she made it to her bedroom door when he pulled her head backwards with her hair as he said, "You're going to wear out first, Blondie." "I'm not weak, you jerk." She shook her head violently to get her hair free. "Wait, that isn't a religious word." He laughed like he thought she joked, but she punched him between his legs and rushed into her room. She made it inside, but he held her arm and shoulder. "Get off me." This time she aimed for his eye with her fingers and pushed until he let her side go. She ran into the closet and opened the safe room. He held the door as he glanced around the room. What is this? If she didn't get him out and close the door, that meant she lost. She grabbed the laptop on the desk by the door and swung it across his cheek like she'd slapped him. "Where you're not staying." He stumbled back, and she slammed the door as he said, "I'll get you yet, Blondie. Don't think we're done." The door automatically locked. She fell backwards on the bunk, clutching her stomach while she caught her breath. A bomb could explode, and no one would get inside. Her vision wavered. She slowly breathed in and out until she could see. The laptop, which organized everything in the safe room, was broken. She had no means of contacting anyone with the pieces on the floor. There was a phone next to where the laptop had been, so she picked it up and said, "Hello?" No answer. She pressed a few buttons to see if she could get a signal, but finally stopped as she said out loud, "It's broken." She looked around the room and saw a video monitor that hung in the corner. She stepped on the bunk and pressed a few buttons as she said, "Hello." Static answered her back as she told herself, "No one's answering." Next, she climbed down and checked the walls and corners of the room. Near the door, she found a panel that hid a black device that had manual levers. It looked like a radio she'd seen in movies as she flipped the buttons and said, "What's this? Hello." Again, no answer. She finally stopped and sat back on the bed as she closed her eyes and said to herself, "Oh goodness, I'm stuck." Adrenaline ran through her veins, but she told herself to relax. Eventually, Roy would come home. She'd tell him about the computer, and hopefully they'd be in time to stop whatever Sam had done to his work laptop. There was enough food in here to last a year, and soon he'd noticed the safe door was closed. She needed to stay calm. Everything was going to be fine. What mattered was stopping whatever Sam had done to Roy's laptop. Roy would get her out of this mess, and she'd tell him everything she could to help him and his family. Chapter 14. Roy's heart was heavy with how he'd left things that morning. He stepped into the elevator up to his condo. Caitlyn's work with the police hadn't hurt his case, and now his family was free. The 3 instances of evidence that he was able to disprove had been enough for the judge to clear their names and reinstate their privileges as United States citizens. It wasn't Caitlyn's fault that somewhere along the way he'd pictured her as some sort of saint. As the elevator doors opened on his floor, his determination grew in every footstep. Falling in love had been a mistake, but perhaps he'd forgive this as long as they both agreed to no more lies of any kind. He opened the door, grateful he'd never been foolish enough to tell her how he felt. However, the smell of burnt food rushed in his lungs. Static electricity ran through him as he slipped his shoes off and noticed his blackened oven. He glanced around his empty apartment and saw nothing. Caitlyn would never leave his kitchen a mess, though. He called his brother Jake, who was picking up the family passports from the district attorney's office, as he opened the oven and saw the charred remains of cookies with uncooked dough next to the oven. This wasn't like her at all. Without waiting for a hello or a status update, Roy told his brother, "Caitlyn's not home." Jake then said, "I have the passports and I'm heading back now. I can help find her when I get there, but let me check in with security." Goosebumps grew on his arms as he opened the refrigerator like she'd leave a clue next to the iced tea. But there was nothing. As he returned to the center of his condo, he stopped in the living room and saw a male footprint full of sand. Roy swallowed and said, "Something's off. There is a footprint on the Persian carpet in the living room." "So?" Jake asked. "Sand gets everywhere, even 30 stories up." True, but Caitlyn had him in the habit of not trekking anything on their clean floors. This wasn't like her. His heart raced a little faster as he said, "We always take our shoes off." Jake asked, "Is it possible she forgot? It was definitely a man's size. If something happened here, then Caitlyn might be in trouble." His body tightened as he told his brother, "The footprints are leading to my office. Check, but be careful," Jake instructed, his tone changing from casual to alarmed. Naveed said 2 security officers were on the beach with Caitlyn, and they were both knocked unconscious. Roy held his breath. His black leather chair had been pushed into the desk this morning. He'd been in here to get all his files for the court session, and he hadn't thrown any furniture. He whipped his head around and glanced everywhere for Caitlyn or any other clue to what had happened. "My chair is against the wall. I'm checking the safe room." The broken remains of her cell phone caught his attention in the middle of her bedroom. He placed his hand on his heart as he knelt down and picked up the screen. Then he dropped it fast, and his neck craned toward the closet. A jolt raced through him as he saw clothes flung to the side. Was she inside the safe room? The door was shut. His feet scratched against plastic pieces. Again, he knelt down and picked up remnants of the laptop that should be inside the safe room. He hung up on his brother without an explanation and dialed the number of the radio. Within seconds, he heard static and asked, "Caitlyn, are you in there?" All he heard was more static, but then her sweet voice said, "Yes, get me out." Good, she was alive. Whatever happened, he'd get her. He put his palm against the door. "You have to do that." Her voice grew stronger. "How? The computer's broken." Which was why he'd called on the radio. Luckily, he had the number programmed in. He tried to remember the directions he'd read multiple times. Go to the closet where the dining table and chairs are. He heard the furniture being moved through their radio connection as she asked, "Okay, now what?" The red button should be visible to her, but he said, "In the corner there is a button." "I see it." She moved some furniture. He heard her drag the table. His adrenaline spiked. "Push it." A few minutes later, the door unlocked, and she fell into his arms. Oh, thank goodness. The knots in her flowing straight hair were strange, and as he hugged her, the trembling wasn't Caitlyn either. He backed up, stared down at her, and felt all the blood drain from his face. She had a red handprint across her cheek, and her body had marks that were clearly going to be bruises everywhere. His heart stopped. What happened? She hugged her waist and couldn't look at him as she said, "Call your brother Beau." His brother was into computers. The smashed one at their feet could be replaced, but he crossed his arms like he was about to cross-examine her as he asked, "Why? Where did you get those bruises?" Caitlyn turned her full attention on him and met his stare. Her serious pause made his hair almost stand on end. "Sam Zandy was here. He went right to your computer and did something to it." No, she'd been hurt because of him. His mind raced. He should have taken her to the courthouse. Leaving in anger had been his mistake. Until now, he'd ensured she was watched, and instead he'd stormed out upset rather than protect her. He glanced at the door to avoid her gaze that felt like a probe into his soul, and he asked, "Where is the security guard?" She ran her hand through her hair, her fingers tangling in the knots, and then she rocked back and forth. "Probably on the beach, still hurt. We need to call the police." Once again, she trembled. He reached out and held her close to his chest and lightly patted her back as she cried, "Relax. Naveed said they were knocked out, but are both okay." "I'm so glad. Just be calm." His shirt was wet, but he didn't say anything about her tears. He stood still until she choked out her words. "Are you sure Sam's gone?" Instantly, his body tightened with alarm. He hadn't called for help, and he'd hung up on his brother. Roy hugged her closer and then let her go. "I'll check the apartment while I speak to my brothers." She grabbed his arm like she needed him to be her anchor. "Okay, I'm staying with you until we know. Come." He motioned for her to walk next to him. He would protect her with his life. But as they checked room after room, his adrenaline lowered and he relaxed his guard. They were alone. The doorbell rang multiple times as he confirmed the closets were empty in the back room. They were done. Caitlyn grew whiter and whiter, and the bruising became more obvious. He placed his hand on her lower back to help her, though he didn't say a word as they walked to open the door. His family burst into his condo, gathered together on a mission to see what was wrong and to help. It would have taken them less than 5 minutes since they all lived in the same building. Caitlyn's small shake hit him hard, but then his 5 brothers, his father and his about-to-be brother-in-law, and all their wives and children meant a little less than 20 people all descended at once. They greeted everyone, but Roy said, "Beau." Caitlyn said Sam attacked her and that her security guard is on the beach. New guards are already on duty. Hannah, with an apologetic and concerned look at Caitlyn, explained. She went for a walk, but promised she wouldn't leave the property. Caitlyn's knees gave out, and she almost fell over. But she held onto Roy's sleeve, Rachel said. "She's distraught. She should sit down." Caitlyn cleared her voice and tried to stand on her own as she said, "Tell Beau he used your computer to get on your server. He wanted access to your family's information." Lois, just back from her weekend vacation with Dylan, motioned toward the couch, and the women all helped Caitlyn walk, though he followed to ensure she was okay as he asked, "How do you know that?" "He told me." Caitlyn turned her head toward him while her friends helped her sit. The bruises were enough proof to him that she didn't make it to the safe room in time. But just like he'd do for the jury, he needed to paint the full picture and not make assumptions. He stated, "You ran into the safe room." She just nodded without blinking. If that wasn't there, I'd probably be dead now. Everything she said was the truth. He'd spent years looking for any small, visible tones, and the image she'd painted of what happened replayed in his mind. She'd believed she'd worked for the police, but what mattered more was her safety. You did as I said. Wait. Her face turned red, which made the bruising more visible. I am sorry. I did betray you, but I didn't know. Sam told me that Officer Baxter works for Curnow. Everyone went quiet, and Caitlyn's face went crimson. With their freedom and abilities to run their companies again, everything about Curnow was going to be found out. They had at their command more connections now, and Beau would figure out if anything was tampered with on his laptop. For now, he met his brother's gaze, sat next to Caitlyn, and hugged his wife. We'll handle it. Caitlyn clutched him tight, and Roy thought everything would be okay. Once she let him go, Caitlyn looked around the room. Did your family get the charges cleared? He hadn't told her. He nodded and tried to smile. Yes, we're free to leave the country and restart our businesses. I've already called my law firm, and I'm back as the CEO. Good, she said, and then her eyelids fluttered. His brother Ollie, the doctor, was the first to clear everyone away. Roy stayed beside his brother, who checked her pulse at her wrist. Caitlyn? She'd fainted. Why? He knew she wasn't actually pregnant. Oliver lifted her eyelids and laid her out on the couch. The handprint on her cheek was vibrant red, and a purple bump was at her temple. Her arms were covered in bruises. Roy stared at her, unsure what to do. Her injuries were his fault. His stomach knotted. Caitlyn hadn't deserved this. She thought she'd helped the police, which was why he hadn't picked up on her lying. She hadn't been. Right now, that didn't matter. He should have protected her better. She'd be safer without him. He loved her, and it was reason to let her go. Chapter 15. Caitlyn moved, and her arms went higher on her pillow. Wait, she had blankets around her, and she was warm. Her eyes fluttered open fast, and she recognized her old bedroom in the condo. The blue comforter and white sheets had been her bed for a while. She sat and stared into the brown eyes of Roy's brother, Ollie. She swallowed and brushed her hand on her forehead to feel for her temperature, but she wasn't warm. What happened? Ollie gently sat on the edge of the bed and then shone a light in her eye. Once he finished his exam, he said, "You have swelling on your head, but I don't think it's a concussion. I think you fainted from lack of food, but you tell me, Nurse Caitlyn." He'd know what he saw. She had no reason to argue against his medical diagnosis, but she nodded like she was being consulted and said, "Sam hit pretty hard, but I hadn't eaten." He pushed some pudding and a bowl of granola at her. "I can see that, though, if you are pregnant. I'm not. Even if she and Roy were successful these past few days, the egg might not even be fertilized yet, as sperm can live 72 hours inside the female body seeking out the egg." Ollie didn't need that detail, though. Her gaze flitted to the door, and her heart beat a little faster as she asked, "Where's Roy?" Ollie stood and reached for the handle as he said, "He's outside. He was pacing and stressing me out, so I kicked him out for me to examine you." As he opened the door, she watched the crack widen to a view of the next room, and she didn't see Roy at first. Her heart deflated as she said, "Thanks, Oliver. I feel okay." But then Roy's hazel eyes met hers as he walked closer. Her spirits lifted. Oliver spoke from the threshold. "You're going to be sore. I've ordered you some painkillers that I will have delivered." "Thanks," she answered automatically, but adrenaline pumped faster as Roy took his place and sat next to her on the bed. Rachel poked her head into the room and said, "We're seeing ourselves out now. If you need Ollie, just call." Both of them waved, but neither stood or said a word while people left the condo. Once the front door closed, she knew that they were alone. Caitlyn needed to tell Roy so much. She swallowed and sat straighter. Roy's tie was undone, and he stared at her, making her feel better just from his being near. She didn't dare touch him, though. He swallowed and broke the silence first when he said, "So, you're not looking well enough to go to your parents tomorrow." A small laugh came out of her as the air cleared. "I forgot about that." He leaned forward and patted her hand. "I know it's hard, but we all need to know what happened." Of course. She should have understood. Everything said might help find Sam so he could be arrested before he hurt someone else. This wasn't about Roy and her, or their marriage. The truth mattered, which was funny as she'd been lying since she met them. and she'd been manipulated into more lies instead of helping. But that needed to end. Sam Zandy found me on the beach and dragged me upstairs. He said he'd kill me, and I fought to get into the safe room. His palm and fingers traced her face. You did the right thing, but clearly he hurt you. I'll be fine, just sore, she whispered, not wanting to break the spell she was under. Roy's deep voice stirred something inside her, but also woke her from the daze she'd been in as he asked, "Did he say anything?" Fair. Her mind became sharp. She needed to explain how she'd ruined everything, but she also needed to give him all the information she had. Officer Baxter works for Kurnow. He's been helping Sam and Adam Lepore all this time. Roy pulled the covers higher and motioned for her to lie down. She did as he asked while he said, "Lepore left the country. Jake is chasing him." The last person that tucked her into bed was probably her mother, and that was at least a decade ago. She fluffed her pillow and said, "I'm assuming Sam intends to leave." Roy gently smoothed her hair out of her face. Bue's been checking all flights for his name on a passenger list. Her body was completely alive. She could feel every cell, but she wasn't sure what to do. She stared up at Roy as she asked, "Is there anything I can do to help?" He smiled down at her. "No, rest. I'll handle getting the police to turn on one of their own." Wait, she was too awake to sleep as he seemed to think she needed to do. She sat up fast and reached for his hand. How? He used his hand to motion that she needed to lie down again. She did as he asked while he said, "Baxter betrayed them too and used his badge against the law." Despite the news, the police don't always back the officers who play hard and fast with the internal rules. Miami PD has some great officers. Now I can talk to them as legal counsel. He stood up to leave her bedroom, but she called out, "Roy?" "Yeah?" He stilled, waiting. Goodness, he was hypnotic, and he deserved someone better than her. All she could muster herself to say was, "We'll talk soon." At the door, he turned and stared at her while he smiled. "I'm glad you're okay, Caitlyn. I'm glad you found me." She meant that far more than just today. Since she'd married Roy, she'd had to look at herself and see that she wasn't who she wished but knew who she wanted to be. He shut the door, and she stared out the window in her room. The evening was at best dusk. There were hours until her normal bedtime. And the more she lay there, and the minutes ticked past, the more she was sure it wasn't time to sleep. She stood, checked her body for anything out of the normal, but felt fine. Her dress was only slightly wrinkled. She slipped out of the bedroom and found Roy standing on the balcony that overlooked the ocean, drinking something amber-colored in a tumbler. He turned toward her, and just how handsome he was hit her hard while he said, "You should stay in bed." The concern on his face was something she didn't deserve. After what had happened this morning, he had every right to hate her. She held her head higher as she said, "We need to talk, Roy." He left his drink on the balcony and came inside, sliding the glass door closed as he said, "It can wait till morning." Perhaps he was right, but then she'd waited too long already. "I don't want to wait." His pace quickened, and he took her hand like she needed his help. "Then let's get you on the couch." She pulled free but walked beside him with measured steps. "I'm not weak." He placed his hand on his heart like he was making a pledge. "Seeing you faint scared me, and normally nothing scares me." She tucked her dress around her knees as she sat, and then waited for him to sit beside her. Her skin felt tighter. She had no right to his empathy, so she pressed her knees together and said, "I lied to you. I lied to my parents. I lied to your family. I don't like me right now, and I don't know when lying became my thing, but it needs to stop." He leaned backwards and stretched while he said, "Agreed, the lying needs to end. I wanted to talk to you about that." More nerves tingled now. He needed to take this more seriously as she shook her head. "You should want to talk to me about that. I was wrong. I didn't know running from my life would make me turn out like this, and I wanted to first apologize." "Don't worry about it." He leaned forward with both hands between his legs. He might be relaxed, but every part of her felt like shaking. She inhaled and said, "I should have told you about Officer Baxter. I honestly believed I was doing the right thing. I am thankful I didn't tell him anything that might hurt any of you. I'm happy about that too." He gave her that small smile of his that pulled at her heartstrings. This wasn't fair. She shouldn't feel this conflicted. She'd made mistake after mistake, and it was time to stop the merry-go-round she'd caused. So she sat straighter while she said, "Second, I don't want to hurt you again." He brushed his leg against hers, accidentally, but the comfort it offered wasn't something she deserved as he said, "Then don't," which brings me to my next point. She spoke fast as if running a marathon. His shoulders were relaxed while he asked, "Okay, what?" Now. It was time. She loved him, and it was time to prove it and let him go. She swallowed and said exactly what she thought. "I think we should get divorced. You don't need a wife, and you're not the oldest for that throne your father doesn't even sit on. Even if your father reclaims his title, Oliver is next in line, and then his son Leo." This time she saw a tick in his face, and his body became more rigid. "I want to ensure you're safe first, and that no matter where you go, no one will ever hurt you because of me or my family again." He hadn't told her something silly like he loved her. That had never been what held them together. The weight in her body felt more like iron chains that rattled while she hugged herself and said, "Glad we agreed so easy then." Without another argument, he jumped out of his seat and said, "For now, please go to bed. We'll figure out the logistics tomorrow." "Night, Roy." She stood. He headed right to his office, but waved at her as he said, "Good night." Right. Her feet dragged on the floor. She'd done the right thing. They weren't in love anyhow. This was for the best. She didn't need to say anything else. Tomorrow, she'd be alone again. She'd messed up Roy's life too many times and told too many lies for her to ever be happy here. Chapter 16. Roy hadn't been in his office or at home when Caitlyn finished packing her suitcase the next day. She tried to take off the temporary wedding ring, but it was stuck. She ran it under the faucet for a good 5 minutes, but the ring never budged from her finger. Somehow in the struggle with Sam yesterday, she must have injured her hands. Once she took the ring off, she'd send it back. She paced the condo one last time and hoped Roy returned before she left. However, the quietness struck her like bullets as the minutes ticked past. She'd worked out her departure with security to ensure her own safety without putting anyone in needless danger. This plan meant staying with her parents for a few days and eventually moving out to a place she'd pick out because she liked it. Even in DC, she'd stayed in that rundown building because it had 3 vacancies so she could be near her friends. Now she'd find a job she wanted and live for herself. When the hour passed, Caitlyn grabbed the handle of her suitcase and headed to the door. Security took the bag and she looked in the condo one last time. She'd been so happy here. Every nook and cranny was clean and in order. Perhaps Roy would find his own happiness too now that she was gone. She closed the door and followed security to the elevator. Not once did she let herself feel, but inside her heart, it seemed like a huge rift was growing, and she'd never be able to put herself back together. She kept her mouth shut the entire flight down, through the lobby, to the car, and even the limo ride across town. What could she say? The old adage that if you love someone, you let them go, played in her mind, but the thought left her cold. Her mind sharpened when they parked on her parents' driveway. This was it. She opened her own door and steeled her nerves. The driver removed her bags from the trunk. It was time. She took the handles to her suitcase and waved the driver goodbye. Without knocking, she used her old key and unlocked the front door. This was temporary. Her parents were in tennis clothes as they walked down the brown carpeted steps toward the front door. She closed the door behind her, looked up and said, "Mom, Dad." Her mother's gaze was fixated on her suitcase as she asked, "Caitlyn, is that your luggage?" There was no getting around this situation. If she'd called ahead and asked, they'd have talked to her about the dinner party and being a faithful wife. This time, love meant leaving. She swallowed and said, "Roy and I are getting divorced." Her parents had identical pursed mouths, but they finished descending the stairs. Her father hugged her, and then her mother kissed her cheek as she said, "But then you're no longer a princess, dear." Now that Roy's family name was clear, her mother had likely intended to tell all her friends in the community that Caitlyn had married royalty. But that was too bad. Caitlyn didn't blink when she met her mother's stare. "Mother, I didn't marry Roy to be a princess in the first place." Without discussion, her father opened the door and her mother kissed his cheek. He would go play tennis, while Mom would stay with Caitlyn once he was gone. Her mother said, "No, you married Roy to anger us." But at least he proved his innocence, and it's on television that there was a big mistake in the legal system. My friends have been calling all morning with the news. The news that the Bentleys were billionaires and cleared of all charges, meaning they had their money and prestige back. Caitlyn sneezed. Her reaction to her mother wasn't good. She ignored how her nose itched as she said, "My marrying Roy wasn't just about you, though." Her mother crossed her arms and tapped her tennis shoe on the marble floor. "Well, why did you marry him then? And what will it take to get you to go back?" Goodness, her sinuses were stuffing fast. Outside, she'd been fine, but inside? "You've always seen me as a bargaining chip in your social standing with your friends." Her mother brushed her hands through her short blonde hair. "That's not entirely true. We love you." Maybe they did in their own way, but her mother's narcissism always held Caitlyn at bay. She swallowed and said, "That's the rub. You both love a part of me, but you want me to be someone I'm not." Her mother directed her toward the kitchen and put the water in the coffee maker as she said, "So you want to be known as Harry's runaway bride or Roy's divorced wife, rather than stay next to one of these good men." Caitlyn took the oil from the cabinet and then the bacon from the freezer that her father would want after his tennis match. "Mother, there is more to life than being married." "There is." Her mother turned the pan on, adding oil as she said, "There is more to being a parent too, and we want what's best for you, just as you must want for your unborn child." Oh. Now was the time to tell the truth and cleanse her soul. She took deep breath and then said, "I'm not pregnant, Mother, but you still look plump, dear." Her mother placed the bacon in the microwave to unfreeze it, but didn't hit the button. Instead, her eyes widened and she took a deep intake of breath. "Did something happen? Why didn't you call me?" Caitlyn scoffed, pressed the button to thaw the meat, and headed to the refrigerator for the muffin mix the chef had made last night, as her parents only paid for staff to come to the house for a few hours a day. She turned the oven to preheat and placed the mix next to the pan. "When have you ever stuck around to care for me when something happened?" Her mother rolled her eyes but dug out the cups for juice and coffees as she said, "When your teeth fell out." Really? Of all the comebacks, that was what struck her mother first, taking a turn as the tooth fairy? Caitlyn took the bacon out of the microwave and shook off the question. "Every time I was sick, you had the nanny stay with me while you continued your social life." Her mother put the first coffee cup in the machine and added the pod on the top. "We checked on your progress." "Of course." Caitlyn picked up the spatula and added the bacon to the hot olive oil. "Well, there is that, I suppose. I shouldn't be giving you a hard time about the past. Listen, my staying here is temporary. I need to find a job and a place to live near whatever hospital I choose." Working is so middle class. Her mother picked up a second frying pan and added the oil. "If you intend to move in here, why don't I look around to find you a husband, dear?" Caitlyn got the eggs from the refrigerator without being asked. If she moved in, breakfast would be her job again in a day. Roy also had a chef and all the food delivered. There she'd only cooked if she wanted. She shook off the comparison and said, "Temporarily. I'm not even divorced yet and not looking for someone to take care of me. You'll need to lose a few pounds first anyhow before we can look." Her mother took the eggs Caitlyn offered, and Caitlyn checked on the heated oven and scooped out the muffin mix to add it to the pan. "Why are you doing this, Caitlyn? I don't understand. Roy seemed like he loved you." Love. If he had cared, then she'd destroyed it. She stiffened but forced herself to continue with the truth. "I asked him to lie to you. I didn't want to face you or Dad, but I can't continue to lie to you, myself, or anyone anymore." Her mother stood there holding the second empty cup in her hand and just stared at her for a moment. Then she took out the old pod, put a new one in, and switched the coffee out as she asked, "Does Roy know you lied? Does he still believe you're having a baby?" Wow, she'd never do that. Her skin was awake with awareness until she sneezed again. Drat. She ignored the reaction. "He knows everything, Mother." Her mother brushed her hand against Caitlyn's shoulder. "He's a good man, Caitlyn." Good meant rich to her mother, and it's not like they were ever poor in her life. She finished adding the muffin mix to the pan and put it in the oven. "That he is, and that's the reason I need to leave him alone." Her mother stared down at her as Caitlyn leaned over the oven. "Do you love him?" Heat grew from inside out and her pulse quickened. No one knew this, not even Hannah. Hopefully her mother couldn't read her mind. She returned to the refrigerator, looking for juice. That doesn't matter. Her mother switched out the pod and made a third cup of coffee for her as she said, "You love him. I can see that, and that's my best weapon to get him back for you." Her mother might try something behind her back. She poured herself a glass of orange juice. Why is everything a weapon to get what we want here? Why couldn't you just ever be happy for me? Her mother put the juice back in the refrigerator. We were happy for you, but now you're getting divorced. We wanted to throw you another wedding where everyone might see how lovely you are. Again, Caitlyn's nose itched. She checked on the bacon as she said, "You mean you want to host a party and show off your pretty daughter who has snagged a prince, as if that reflects on you." As soon as she put the spatula down, she sneezed. The air around her mother had always done this to her. She'd forgotten, but the stuffiness gave her an aching head. Her mother said, "Fine. If you're staying here, then you follow our rules. Tonight we're telling everyone that you and Roy are simply attending separate events because you missed us." More lies. Perhaps this was how it became so easy for her. The thought stuck in her brain like a donut stuck in her belly. Tonight, her mother flipped the eggs and checked the bacon as she said, "Yes, your father and I are throwing a dinner party, remember? You're not to tell anyone about this dirty divorce business." Caitlyn's spine tingled as her hands curled at her sides. "I'm not lying anymore." Her mother came closer. Caitlyn sneezed as her mother said, "Then don't lie. Just pretend everything is fine." The lack of distinction was how she'd ended up in her mess. Her head began to pound. She needed to get away from whatever perfume her mother wore. She backed out of the kitchen as her eyes watered. "Everything is fine, I guess. Roy never loved me. I've accepted that." The tears were from that perfume. It wasn't because she was sad, definitely not. She closed her eyes and ignored that her cheeks were wet. Her mother stayed at the oven. "On that you're wrong, my dear. Just as you're wrong about leaving the man you love." Caitlyn turned her head and reached for her suitcase. "I'm going to my room now, Mother. I'll wear a dress to your party, but that's all I can promise." "It's a start," her mother replied from the kitchen. "And I'll set up an appointment with my trainer so you can start exercising that pouch off today." Caitlyn let the tears fall and climbed the stairs. Love didn't matter. She'd messed up any chances she had with Roy, and nothing could change all her lies. She'd not take a dime from her marriage, which meant she was starting from zero. As soon as she found a job and a small place to live, she'd get out of this madhouse too. She didn't need much. Chapter 17. Roy Bentley walked the halls of his high-rise office building that employed over 1,000 legal minds. This was his business, and he was back in control. Now that all charges were dropped against him, he could legally retake his rightful place. Casework increased overnight, it seemed, as word that his family was dismissed of all charges spread over the internet like bees returning to their nest. Everything about today was supposed to shine, but his soul stirred and his gut felt like he'd been kicked in the private parts. Watching Caitlyn leave twisted him up inside. He'd refused to tell her goodbye when she'd left, though she'd looked for him. The last thing he needed was for her to pity him, and in that moment, he'd been weak. As he walked through the sleek glass building with black floors and shiny walls that glimmered from the Miami sun, his staff waved and smiled at him. When he passed his desk, his secretary, the young brunette who always had a ponytail, Stephanie Wilson, stood and said, "We're glad you're back at work, sir." Stephanie made great coffee and was pretty, but her smile was nothing compared to Caitlyn's brilliance. Caitlyn had made his ordeal enjoyable. He faked a smile. "Thanks, it's good to be back. I'll need all those filings done by the end of the workday." She gave a curt nod and hopped back to her desk. "We're on it." Stephanie, no doubt, was at the top of her game and truly handling everything for him behind the scenes. He closed his office door and turned on his work computer. Stephanie sent him about 100 reports she must have been running. He opened the summary report and caught up to speed. His eyes blurred despite the retina advances to the view screen. The sun was already past its midpoint, and people would probably start going home soon. Roy rubbed his temples, needing another coffee, when someone knocked on the door. He glanced up and saw his brother, Logan, who let himself in as he asked, "Roy, talk to me." Roy stood, closing the screen. Logan chose the leather office chair opposite the desk without being asked, as if it were his throne. "You're back at work. and his brother was running his investment firm again. They all were back to normal, almost. Roy retook his seat. Absolutely, been here most of the day. Logan scooted closer, and his tone was accusatory when he said, "Caitlyn's gone, I know." Roy felt the squeeze inside his chest. Going home, alone, didn't appeal to him. He would never see her again. His body craved her, but more important was how she'd left this huge crater in his heart. Logan pressed his hand against the black glass desk. "And you're okay with it?" Had she given him options? No. He refused to make himself sick over Caitlyn's departure. "She didn't leave me much choice." Logan leaned back and stared at him like he was still the older brother teaching Roy how to play baseball. "Seems to me you were falling in love with her." Love. His heart fluttered. He stood. Closed the door. Logan rose and reached it first. He shut the door and Roy's adrenaline pumped faster. "Who were you speaking to about this?" "No one." Logan sank back into his chair. "Why does it bother you if I spoke about it?" His racing heart and sweaty palms hadn't happened since some law professor made him feel stupid for his opening statement. He ignored the feeling and sat, elbows on the desk, while he denied everything. "It doesn't." Logan's gaze narrowed. "Because you can admit that you love Caitlyn?" His brother made it seem like he had magical powers where he saw the truth that Roy didn't want him to see. Roy pressed his heels into the floor like he did whenever he needed to focus and shook his head. "I don't know about that." Logan stared at him like he'd judged him, and the verdict wasn't in Roy's favor. "You don't? I thought it was obvious. Last night you were so concerned about her." His face heated. This wasn't good at all. Roy held the armrests of his chair and hoped his unease wasn't obvious. "Anyone would have been. She was hurt because of me, and I can't force her to stay." Leaning closer, Logan said, "You could have told her how you feel and risk being stupider than he already was. It was better to let emotions die." "Feelings don't matter." Logan got to his feet and made a proclamation. "That's where you're wrong, little brother. I love Hannah and she loves me. I'm happy for you. And Caitlyn made you happier than I've seen you, even when we were all growing up at home." True. But in the end, none of this mattered. The pounding in his chest didn't change anything. She wanted a divorce. Go get the woman you love before it's too late. His brother left without another word, and Roy went back to work, pushing aside Logan's advice. With the increase in casework from today, he anticipated returning to where he'd left off by the end of the month. Stephanie had done her job very effectively. He clicked the approval button more times than he could count, but nothing kept his focus for long. Every few seconds, the image of Caitlyn walking out of the condo with her suitcase behind her replayed in his head, over and over again, and jaw clenched. As the hours ticked past, Roy became uneasy. Finally, at 4 o'clock, he adjusted his tie and jacket and headed out the door. He stopped at Stephanie's desk. "I have to go." She stood and held out 4 file folders. "Sir, we need your signature on these new clients. Can you check them out before you go?" He took the files, weighing the need to leave with doing his job, something he'd missed terribly. "I'll review them now." Roy hurried back into his office and flipped through the papers, picking up his pen from the holder. Everything was fine. He signed where Stephanie put the flags and closed the folders. Now he was free and didn't have anything to hold him here. He walked out of the office again and handed the folders to her. "Finished. Please send me the report at the end of the day."
She hugged the folders to her chest, clearly happy to be running things again, as she said, "Glad to have you back, sir."
He waved at her and intended to give her a giant raise. "Thanks." Outside, the humidity of Miami beat down on his head until he slid into the cool air conditioning of his limo. Once he was inside, he rolled down the partition with a push of a button. "Driver, please take me to where you dropped off Caitlyn." The driver kept his gaze on the street ahead. "We'll go to her parents' house then." The dinner had been scheduled for tonight. Surely they'd canceled? The drive through Miami took more time than he wished. His skin felt jittery, and at last they stopped in front of a house in Sunrise. The party must have continued, though, as cars were all over the side street and in the driveway. Roy stepped onto the well-cut grass toward the walkway. His knock on the door echoed, but he stood still until Caitlyn's father opened the door. The bright sun and the humidity in the air made this moment heavy. Roy stilled as he said, "Good afternoon, sir. I was hoping to see Caitlyn." Her father held the door wide and a blast of air conditioning hit him. "She wasn't expecting you." Fair enough. Her father should protect her. Roy never should have let her leave. He lowered his head. "I know. I was hoping she'd see me anyway." Her father stepped to the side and waved for him to enter the Cooper home. "Please, go right on out to the back patio." Roy checked to see that her father wore his shoes, so Roy kept his on. The house was full of people, and he scanned the laughing folks but didn't see Caitlyn, though many people smiled and said hello. He weaved through the unfamiliar house and found the back patio. At first, he didn't see her, but then he saw a bright red dress that clung to all her glorious curves. Instantly, his body became aware of her, which hadn't happened to him since he was 14. He stepped behind her and asked over her shoulder, "Caitlyn, what on earth are you wearing?" Her face turned bright red as she glanced over her shoulder, and her body tensed when she met his gaze. "Oh goodness, it's that bad. I thought so." The view of her chest as she turned toward him was sweet torture. He breathed in her rose scent and awareness of her grew, as he said, "No, not at all. You're beautiful. I'm just used to seeing you in more flowing dresses." She pivoted fully toward him and kept her arms crossed, but that only pressed her breasts higher. The blush on her cheek was the only thing that seemed natural. In his house, Caitlyn hadn't worn much makeup, but today she was completely put together and looked so different. She took his breath away, but she didn't seem real. "My mother insisted I wear this. What are you doing here?" Somehow, he needed to convince her to come home with him and never leave. He hoped she agreed to his argument that he started with a simple, "I missed you." Her mother floated over with a peach-colored beverage in her hand. "Oh, Caitlyn, your husband returned for our party. Excellent." Her mother continued her flight toward her friends next to them. Caitlyn's face flooded with color. "Oh no, she probably thinks we're getting back together." He brushed his hand against her shoulder. She didn't back away, and the openness in her clear gaze made him ache to hold her again. His voice was deeper in tone than he usually spoke, but he said, "I'd like for you to come home with me." Guests buzzed around like they were listening in on her conversation as her entire body pulsated with energy. She wished they were alone, as her hands clenched her sides and her body stilled as she asked, "Why?" His pulse beat faster than he thought possible. No arguments, debates, or anger at the past clouded his judgment. His brain screamed this fact was dangerous, but his heart pounded that it was the absolute truth. "Because I love you." A huge smile grew on her face. Caitlyn took his hand and tugged for him to go with her as she said, "Come with me." She set a fast pace as they ran through the house and up the stairs. He barely had time to notice the family photos, except they were all staged in studios. They made it to a bedroom that looked like a teenage girl still lived here with all the pink and gold glitter. But she closed the door and said, "Now that we're alone, please say that again." He ignored the surroundings and focused on his wife. He squeezed her hands and stepped closer to her as he said, "Caitlyn, come home." "Because." She swung their arms like she was excited. He caressed the soft skin of her cheek and held her tight. "I love you. Going home without you feels lonely. This is amazing." Without a word, she slipped out of his arms and bounced to her closet as she said fast, "Let me get my bag." Confusion raced through him and his mind was cloudy. "You're coming with me? I love you too." She made a huge bang when she took the luggage off a shelf and it landed on the ground. She didn't even blink as she then said, "I hadn't unpacked, so we're set now." His heart was lighter. She loved him. He took her bag from her and they walked downstairs together, hand in hand. As they made it to the bottom step, her mother in her cocktail dress stood next to her father in his linen slacks and flowing organic cotton shirt, and both of them stood between the last step and the door as her mother asked, "Caitlyn, Roy, where are you both going?" Roy followed Caitlyn as she directed them to go around her parents toward the door. Caitlyn said, "Home, mother. Sorry I darkened your doorstep this morning. Glad everything worked out for you, dear," her mother said and waved at one of her friends, clearly done with her now. Caitlyn sneezed, but she hugged both of her parents. He shook her mother and father's hands and waited until they were outside where Caitlyn again sneezed, her blue eyes watering. "Are you sick?" "They could make a stop at the drugstore and pick up cold medicine." She shook her head. "It's my mother's perfume. I think I'm allergic. Roy didn't blame Caitlyn as her step held more bounce the farther they went from the front door, across the lawn and into the safety of his waiting limo. His lips tingled for a kiss, without an audience. Caitlyn dug through her purse for a packet of tissues and some lotion and started to remove the makeup off her face like it itched. Her sweet face had bruises from yesterday and his gut twisted. On the other hand, her natural beauty shone through. They arrived at the building, and he led her through the lobby fast so no one else saw her in that red dress that he longed to unwrap off her body. Finally, they made it up the elevator, and once inside the condo, he closed the door. Caitlyn slipped off her shoes, bare feet against the tile, dress fitted to her hips. Your mother has no idea that curves are sexy. Roy wrapped his arms around her as they entered the living room, and she snuggled against him. You forgive me for lying? I was angry because you didn't tell me sooner. He flinched, afraid he'd taken a pin and popped the balloon she'd been sailing on. But Caitlyn, the truth is I would have done the same. You were trying to help the police because of Hannah, who is like a sister to you. Really? Her soft voice held a hint of hope. He led her toward the couch and waited for her to sit. She walked a little slower, as if she expected something negative. He took the cushion next to her and held out his hand, which she accepted. If one of my brothers or my sister decided to do something stupid, I'd have worked with the authorities, and marrying a man you don't know qualifies. Her eyes watered, and some leftover mascara washed down her cheeks. He picked up a tissue from the table behind them and handed it to her. She wiped her face and said, Roy. Whatever she was going to say remained unsaid. He gently squeezed her hand and asked, yes. She balled the tissue in her hand, her gaze focused on his. Any word about Officer Baxter or Sam Zandy? His gut twisted. He personally wanted to face off against Sam for those bruises she'd hidden under makeup today. He carefully traced her cheekbone and jaw as his heart beat differently, and his lips reminded him with a pulse that he wanted nothing more than to kiss her. He tilted his head. No, but I don't want to talk about any of them tonight. I want to celebrate being with you. A smile tugged at her mouth and bloomed. She put her legs over his lap and scooted closer, wrapping her arms around his neck. Sounds perfect. If you hadn't come to the party, I intended to find you later to tell you how I feel. Her lips parted and her eyes closed as he said for the record. Her eyes opened and she asked, I'm the court? Roy massaged her lower back. You're the only court that matters to me, and I just want it stated for the record that I said it first. I love you, Caitlyn, and want only you as my wife. Her lids lowered and he kissed her. She tasted like apples and strawberries and everything sweet. He never wanted to let her go, ever again. She was his. Chapter 18. Caitlyn stretched her arms and snuggled into the soft sheets and blankets in Roy's bedroom, which was now theirs. She thought the green decor was perfect. The other room could serve as a second bedroom or an office. She didn't care because she had no intention of moving back into it. She slowly turned to her side when she heard Roy get out of the shower. She sat as he strolled out with a wicked smile. His cell phone rang, and he stopped to answer it, pulled into business rather than bed. Oh, well. She threw on a blue dress made of cotton that had pockets on the sides, then went to get them breakfast, but Roy held out his phone for her. Caitlyn, Ollie wants to talk to you. Me? Her eyes widened. She hadn't actually spoken one-on-one to Oliver since she fainted and he checked on her, but that hadn't been about work. She took the phone and said, Hello? Ollie sounded like he was in a busy place with lots of background noise when he said, Caitlyn, my practice is in need of a nurse. Can you work here with me? Her heart leapt, and she met Roy's gaze as she nodded, though only Roy could see. I wanted to ask you if there might be a position open. So that's a yes? Ollie asked. Roy dropped his white towel and quickly dressed in green boxer shorts and gray pants with a white shirt. True. Oliver couldn't see her. Her hands trembled with excitement. Yes, sounds good. Oliver spoke to someone else and then said, Perfect. I'll send the application over today and you can start first thing tomorrow. Roy finished dressing with the suit jacket and his tie. Thank you, Ollie, she said and ended the call. She spun on her heels and handed Roy back his phone, throwing her arms around him as she said, Your brother just offered me a job. He kissed her nose as he hugged her. You wanted to work there. She'd worked as a nurse in the ER, and it had been brutal. Now she had the job she wanted, working with pregnant women, and it was a dream come true. She released Roy, and he straightened his tie as she said, "I did. I thought I'd have to beg." Roy adjusted his suit jacket as well, and then placed his hand on her lower back as they walked out of the bedroom. "You worked well together, and he saw how you cared for our mother. Ollie's practice could use you." She giggled as they headed toward the kitchen, though their food was hot and ready for them to eat, as the family chef had already made his stop here. They took their plates and coffee carafe to the patio to eat together while Caitlyn said, "I'm excited. Hannah's going to be one of our patients. Logan told me." Roy put his food on the table and held her seat for her as he said, "I'm happy for you." He checked his watch. "I have to eat fast and get to work." She waited for him to sit next to her and let her napkin fall on her lap as she said, "Come home early, if you can. I'll have dinner waiting for us." He poured them both coffee, giving her a sensual wink. "You make going at all a chore. Last night had been wonderful. If only they had more alone time without threats. But that would happen soon enough." She took the cup he offered. "That's because I love you." His eyes had a gleam in them as he said, "We'll plan a real honeymoon soon." "Sounds great." They both quickly ate their breakfast and sipped their coffee as the ocean waves seemed like a painting of paradise. Neither one of them said a word while they finished their coffee and scooted closer so they watched the ocean together. 5 minutes of relaxation before the day began, Caitlyn thought. Coffee gone, Roy took her mug as they stood. She gathered the plates to bring them inside. Roy frowned. "Caitlyn, don't go out today unless you clear it with security and let me know." They put the dishes in the sink and she turned on the water for them to wash their hands. "I thought we were all free now." He rinsed the soap and handed her the towel to dry off as he said, "From the police, not the ones that framed my family." "Done." They turned off the faucet and headed to the front door next to each other as she said, "I have nowhere to be, though I was hoping to pick out a few new outfits with Hannah." "Why not have clothes delivered? Hannah and I used to celebrate at the mall whenever we had good news, like you and I being together, her pregnancy and your family name being cleared." Caitlyn smiled at all of the wonderful news. "But if it's too much, we can stay here." "No, we need to live our lives. Just keep security with you at all times." The last time she'd had security, it hadn't mattered, but she didn't want to be afraid to leave the condo. She moved to the side and he selected his black Italian loafers as she bounced on her tiptoes. "I still need to ask Hannah if she is up to it. It's not a big deal. Text me when you know." He kissed her cheek. Caitlyn wanted more than a small peck and kissed him on the lips, drawing out the pleasure of their mouths together. "Have fun at work." Roy opened the door and loosened his tie, his eyes warm. "I'm already looking forward to coming home to you." After he left, she sent Hannah a text. "Hannah, do you want to go shopping? Sam probably left the country and security knows about Adam." She entered her closet and found a feminine seafoam green dress with the hem to her shins, soft and comfortable. Her phone beeped and she read, "Sounds fun. Meet you in the lobby in 10 minutes. Perfect." She headed to the bathroom to shower as she quickly told her husband, "Roy, Hannah and I are going to the mall. See you this evening." Done. She cleaned up and dashed downstairs where Hannah, with her big, welcoming smile, waited near the small coffee stand for her as security guards were almost everywhere in the lobby, ready to escort them to the limo where 2 security guards were already in the front seat with the driver. They went to the mall, and for the first time in years, Caitlyn didn't look at prices. She ignored all dollar signs and just picked out simple, cotton, breathable fabrics that made her feel pretty. She also bought sandals and nurses' sneakers. Hannah chose outfits that were more form-fitting, but that had always been her style. Caitlyn helped her too. "Glad you don't care that people see your pregnancy." With lattes in hand, Hannah glowed and bumped into her like she did to playfully get her attention as they walked. "My husband thinks I'm pretty." "'Cause he's smart," Caitlyn said and remembered Roy's kisses on all her own curves. The driver closed the door and security sat with him. Hannah relaxed in her seat and said, "Caitlyn, this is why you're still my best friend." Hours later, security carried about 10 bags apiece, and they stopped to get some cinnamon buns. They laughed and planned Hannah's nursery. As they headed into the next department store, Hannah said, "This is fun. We haven't done this in a very long time. Caitlyn checked out one more shirt, but it felt like too much polyester, so she put it down. It's nice choosing clothes without my mother's voice in my head. Hannah tugged lightly on Caitlyn's dress. The loose-fitting chic thing you've been doing lately really fits you. Bohemian. This fit her personality, and she wasn't pleasing her parents to get them to stop hounding her or dressing to be picture perfect. It's sad I'm just now figuring myself out. Why? Adulting is hard for everyone, and sometimes we never figure ourselves out. You're being too smart for me, Hannah Bentley. They both laughed. Roy seemed to like her just fine without an ounce of makeup on, despite her mother's insistence that a woman should never leave the house without it. Suddenly, goosebumps grew on her arm, and she glanced behind the rack. Her heart almost stopped when she saw two men together barreling toward them. She backed behind the huge security guards as she said, "Hannah." Hannah looked in the same direction, and their security guards surrounded her too, as Caitlyn walked beside her best friend. Hannah asked, "What is it?" "Run!" Caitlyn didn't move. She couldn't. Her feet were like lead. Security spoke on their headsets. Hannah's face paled. Who are they? Caitlyn's head pounded, and she wished somehow she could just disappear while she said, "Sam Zandy and Officer Baxter are coming right toward us." Hannah linked her arm through Caitlyn's and said, "Security is right here." Caitlyn intended to jump in front of Hannah and her unborn child if anything happened to their huge security guards that now formed a wall of muscles around them. Last time, 2 security officers had been hit on the back of the head. This wasn't good, but now they formed a small army and seemed well trained. She let Hannah go as she shook her head. More people can't get hurt because of me. Caitlyn began to take a step forward in front of security, but Hannah tugged her backward. "Don't be stupid, Caitlyn." "I'm not," Caitlyn said, now able to see between the huge guards. Baxter and Zandy had hurried across the mall and now stopped right in front of her, only blocked by her security team. Caitlyn ignored the buzz of fear in her veins and held her head high. "Officer Baxter, you haven't arrested Sam Zandy despite the police report that I filed regarding his assault." "Caitlyn Cooper." Baxter flashed his police badge. Her nostrils flared and she said, "Bentley, I'm Caitlyn Bentley." Baxter then said so loud that onlookers heard him, "Filing a false police report is a crime." Hannah shook her head and crossed her arms as if Baxter was stupid. "Her husband is a lawyer." Baxter showed his badge like he was waving it for the world to see while he said, "Anyone who gets in my way is also committing a crime." He lowered the badge and met her gaze through her guards as he said, "Caitlyn Bentley, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand the rights I have just read to you? With these rights in mind, do you wish to speak to me?" Her heart raced so fast that she was going to break. Baxter's plan was good. Her hired security team might not risk going to jail for her. She swallowed and wasn't sure what she'd do. Sweat beaded down her neck, but then she saw from the mall entrance Roy's dark eyes. She could breathe. "Look, my attorney is here." Baxter turned and scanned the crowd of onlookers. "Where?" Roy walked with a dozen officers from Miami PD, and all of them in uniform. The crowd parted as he said, "With a few of your fellow policemen who don't like officers taking bribes from Kerno. There is no proof." Baxter's face paled. Caitlyn let her hands fall to her side. Roy would find a way to legally end any threat against them. She should have had faith that he'd work the system to his advantage, because that fit him, righting wrongs. Roy's stance was confident. "Actually, there is. Now step away from my wife and her guards." "You are making a mistake," Baxter said while the police officers surrounded him and Zandy. Zandy backed up. Roy patted the guard's arm to pass and join Caitlyn and Hannah as he told Baxter, "An attempt at a false arrest is also a crime." The officers took over, reading both men their rights. None of this seemed real to Caitlyn until Roy walked past security and took her hand. Her pulse calmed instantly and she became aware of just him as she asked, "Is it over?" "Yes," he said firmly. Caitlyn hugged him. "You really do know good cops." He patted her back like she needed to be calmed down still. "Most are. It's the few rotten ones that make the rest look bad. Are you and Hannah done shopping now? Yes, we're done, Hannah said. Let's get out of here. Then Hannah's eyes widened, and Caitlyn looked over her shoulder to see that Hannah was smiling at Logan. Logan, you're here too. He kissed Hannah's forehead. The second I heard about this, I ran to find you. Roy's arm tightened around her waist and she leaned into him with a smile. Now that we're all together, Roy said, let's go home.
Sounds great.
She walked beside him toward the door where the limo waited for them. The ride home was easy. Roy held her close and caressed her arm, showing his affection. She loved his touch. She loved him. Caitlyn realized that while there was no immediate threat, the family still had to find out who was behind the setup. The Bentleys were free at long last, and Sam Zandy had been arrested along with Officer Baxter, which should lead them closer to Curnow. The limo brought them to the condo building, and they rode the elevator to their floor and waved Logan and Hannah goodbye. As they walked toward the door, Caitlyn said, I didn't cook anything for dinner though. I promised I would, if you came home early. He unlocked the door and shook his head while he waited for her to go inside. I'm sure the chef left something delicious, or we can order something. Caitlyn glanced at the kitchen and saw food already set on the table waiting under silver cloches and was grateful for everything. Roy made her life better in every possible way, but the most important thing was love. She never wanted to be without him. She took off her shoes as she said, I like your chef's cooking. Don't order anything else as I'm sure it's amazing. He took his black loafers off and placed them beside her shoes and she closed the cabinet. Any word on Adam Lepore? He nodded. He's currently in Paris, but Dylan and Lois are on another flight. To where? Dylan's not saying. Caitlyn ran her hand through her hair and then gathered what she could of the packages security had left her near the door, heading toward the bedroom. Without being asked, Roy picked up the rest of the bags as she said, but at least the imminent threat is over and we can move on with our lives. That's the best part. He winked, and the instant they put the bags in the closet, he pulled her close and kissed her. He was right. Being together was the best part. Chapter 19. Caitlyn finished her breakfast and checked her image in the mirror in the living room. She had on a light blue cotton dress that went to her knees and a big hat to block the sun from her face. Am I dressed for this mystery place we're going? You're perfect. Roy, dressed in a simple cotton shirt and white pants that clung to his body, handed her a pair of Ray-Ban sunglasses that she put on. They headed to the door where 4 pieces of luggage were taken out of the condo by security. Can you tell me where we're going yet? Soon. The mystery continued. She walked to the door and in the cabinet found her sandals. Roy also picked out some fancy black sandals. She eyed him admiringly and wished she could strip him naked again. Later, her heart pounded as she gazed at the door. Why are you being so secretive, my love? He held out his hand and opened the door. Come with me. Anywhere, she thought, and walked outside with him. He locked the door behind them. She said, I'm coming, but I'd like to know where we're going. He winked at her and offered his arm. You'll find out when we get there. Clearly, he was having fun by not telling her anything. She sighed and resigned herself to be patient, but as they drove to a private airfield in Opelika, she saw a huge plane with the name Bentley emblazoned on it. She held her hat as it was windy when she stepped out of the limo onto the tarmac and glanced up at the plane. What's this? My jet. He walked next to her while a flight attendant stood on the top step with glasses of champagne. Caitlyn took the flute once she made it to the top step. As they went towards soft brown leather seats that looked more like fancy couches, she sipped her champagne and he sat beside her. Her pulse spiked from his cologne. How far does it go? The gleam in his eye made the answer obvious. He said, we could make it anywhere in the world and do it in style. The champagne was sweet, and there were strawberries on the tray in front of them. She popped one in her mouth, and the champagne became even tastier. She finished her fruit. We don't have to go anywhere. There are people trying to destroy your family. He shrugged and put his glass down as he brushed the hair off the side of her face. We live with a level of security, but we also live with being able to do anything we want. The plane engine revved and the flight attendant picked up the fruit and their empty glasses. Once she walked away, Caitlyn asked her husband, so where are you taking me? He kissed her cheek and then tugged her seatbelt over her lap. You're going to have to work on that patience thing." A laugh escaped her lips. She crossed her arms and pouted a little, though it was hard to pull off because she was so happy. "I promised Hannah the first to be at every single one of her appointments." He fixed his own seatbelt and took her hand, kissing the knuckles. "And she had one this week, which means she doesn't see my brother for another month." Roy had a plan. Her gaze narrowed, and she leaned closer to him as she playfully rubbed a tiny wrinkle out of his shirt. "So we'll be gone for a month?" He wrapped his arm around her and said, "Only if you want to be." The plane picked up speed down the runway until the craft lifted into the air in a smooth glide. She tugged his shirt collar so he'd come down to her as she said, "You're difficult to figure out sometimes. Patience is a virtue." He closed his eyes like he'd kiss her. She gave a small sigh and wrapped her arms around his neck. "It's not one I possess then. I want to know." His lips were a fraction of an inch from her mouth as he said, "Guess I'll have to distract you." And then he kissed her while they flew into the sunset, his touch making her feel complete. Wherever they were heading, she was sure it was paradise. The next morning, she woke up on a cocoon-style bed made for two. Until last night, she'd thought the pods were only single chairs, but apparently Roy had special ordered pods to keep them both together. She pressed a button, and once they were out, she saw the bright morning sun against the tarmac. She shook her still sleeping husband awake and asked, "Okay, the plane's landed. Where are we?" He gave her a big smile like he knew exactly what her birthday present was, and he'd make her wait till after the party. He stood and stretched while he said, "You'll figure it out." They both cleaned up quickly. Her pulse zipped with excitement, and she had a bounce to her step when they deboarded the plane. She glanced around the airport and said, "There are no signs." His hand went to her lower back, and they continued to walk from the tarmac and into the airport itself, as he said, "It's a private field, not a public airway." They entered the empty private terminal, though she heard a few of the workers talking. And it wasn't Miami's usual Spanish. She peeked at her husband. No one's speaking English. He shrugged and guided her toward the front door and the waiting limo outside as he said, "That leaves out England and Western Canada." She continued to walk beside him, though she made a running commentary as they went outside. "We were less than 10 hours on the plane, and generally the dark hair and brown-eyed people." Her gaze then spotted a green, white, and red flag that waved from a pole. "Wait." She tapped her husband playfully on his chest and said, "That's the Italian flag." He led her into the limo, and she sat opposite him as he said, "It is, though we're heading to Off-Sea on vacation. A friend of mine is getting married to a noble." "Off-Sea?" She bumped her knees to his. "So, we're going to a wedding?" "For a day." He kissed her forehead. "Then we can stay on vacation for as long as you want. For tonight, though, we're heading into Venice. Venice with Roy." She hadn't imagined she'd ever be there. Her heart raced that true happiness seemed possible, now more than ever. Quiet, she didn't say much as they transferred from the limo to a speedboat. Caitlyn took it all in. The boat let them off in Piazza San Marco, and Roy led her into a yellow and white hotel that had gilded corners in the lobby that overlooked the water. He checked them in and brought her to a huge suite of rooms. At some point, this was clearly a palace made for rich nobles of the past. The walls had murals that blended naturally, and the room had a sway to it from the water around the hotel. She walked onto the balcony and looked out over the water and saw bridges and people on boats and gondola rides below. "You are being quiet for once." Roy joined her on the balcony. "Roy, this is beautiful." He handed her a glass of champagne. "Not as beautiful as you. Why did you do all this?" She accepted the crystal flute. He clinked it with hers, and they both took a sip. "You married me. You helped me save my family. And I love you. You said you didn't want a big wedding, so I thought it was better that we go on our honeymoon. This is beautiful." She closed her eyes to remember everything she saw, like she might bottle it up to savor later. He set the glasses on the table that was there for a private breakfast and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Then kiss me." Without opening her eyes, she brought her arms around his neck again and said, "Always." Somehow, he'd shown her that life with him could be filled with happiness. He made everything possible, and she loved him. The song in her head hummed again, and then she laughed. She'd been singing an old song from Frank Sinatra her grandmother played as a girl. Finally, she knew the name of it was Strangers in the Night. The song fit her and Roy's life. In fact, life was perfect. Chapter 20. The limo to Avesey hadn't taken too long. Roy split his attention between his brother on the phone and Caitlyn, who watched the countryside from Venice to Avesey with fascination. They drove toward an estate that looked like it could be in one of the romantic movies Roy knew she liked to watch, complete with fountains and green fields and a house that was bigger than a castle itself. The white-walled estate was almost as beautiful as Buckingham Palace, though had some floral details to the designs. She was even more attractive with her wide-eyed wonder, though he didn't have a chance to kiss her as often as he wanted. His brother sounded slightly panicked, and Roy wished he could do more. "Dylan, if you need us, we'll come get you." His brother scoffed like he found the idea silly as he said, "Lois and I are fine. Don't worry about us. Have you heard from Beau, though? Going after the men responsible for what happened to them was dangerous." Roy was torn between being in the thick of the fight or staying back to protect his family, according to the plan the brothers had originally come up with once they were out of jail. Caitlyn had no idea how dangerous the world could be. Prison hadn't been good for any of them, but at least he'd had his brothers beside him. He lowered his voice so Caitlyn might not hear. "No, should I be worried about him?" Caitlyn turned her full attention toward him. She must have heard anyway. Roy took a steadying breath, but then Dylan told him, "Beau is being singled out. He's gone underground in an attempt to find the source electronically." Underground sounded like he was protecting himself, and Beau was the best man he knew for computer safety. Beau would find out what Sam did to the computer, and if there was an electronic file, he'd find it. Roy said, "I hope he's safe. He brought Sarah," Dylan added. "Good." She was fire and he was ice, but somehow they blended well. Roy stared at Caitlyn and he was grateful she was here, with him, for always. "Is there anything I can do?" Dylan reminded him what they'd discussed in prison once they'd all agreed to marry women they didn't know. Logan was a financial wizard, so he was in charge of getting money for the family to live again. Oliver was the doctor, and he was in charge of helping their mother beat her cancer. Roy was the lawyer and in charge of getting their names cleared. Now all of that was done, and it was the other brothers' turn to act. Dylan was using his investigation tactics, Jake was using his negotiating skills, and Beau was using his cyber training to track down and find exactly who had hurt their family. Roy's heart nearly stopped when he thought that any of his brothers might be hurt in all of this. "We've always said Beau, Jake, and I were the offensive team, and you, Oliver, and Logan were the defensive team. You've done your job in getting our names cleared. Now let us do our jobs in finding the guys who did this to our family." Except the family name and safety wasn't a job. Roy didn't argue semantics. "I'd still like to help." The limo was in line to bring them to the front for the wedding, as Dylan said. "And you will if any of us need legal help. Call me later." Roy hung up. Caitlyn scooted closer and patted his arm to comfort him while she asked, "Who was that?" He met her gaze and instantly calmed down. In the blue silk dress and the diamonds he'd taken from the family vault for her, she looked like a queen today. "Dylan, they've left Paris." The limo inched closer to the entrance as Caitlyn whispered, "You sounded worried." True, and there was nothing he could do to stop that. He whispered to her, "He's determined to find out who is running Kierno and unmask who targeted our family." Her lips went into a cute little pout as she said, "I don't want anyone getting hurt over this." "Me either," he agreed fast. Finally, the limo was next for them to get out. He kept his voice low as he explained, "But I can't stop my brothers. All I can do is hope we're all together when this is done." She kissed him, and her lips made the world disappear. The doors to the limo opened. He helped his wife out of the car, and they climbed the marble steps that had a thick red carpet made for nobility, directing them into the estate. Caitlyn whispered, "Tell me again about the couple getting married." He took one of the schedules that a groomsman handed everyone and pointed to the groom's name. "We've recently bought a lot of wine for various corporate functions from this French vineyard. The owner is marrying a noble's daughter, and this is their royal wedding." Caitlyn looked at how the green olive trees were trimmed short, and all trimmed like they pointed to the house and heaven in the sky. Everything was so beautiful. Then, heading in the directions of a backyard that rivaled Versailles, as she said, "This is fancy." He adjusted his tuxedo tie like he was James Bond as he said, "We're dressed for it. Let's head in." They walked down the back stairs that led to where 1,000 white seats were lined up. As they made their way through rose petals covering the aisle, Caitlyn stopped and tugged him closer. "Roy." "Yeah." He didn't move. She took a deep breath and gazed all around them, pausing briefly on a few diamond tiaras before she said, "Thanks to my mother's deportment classes, I won't embarrass you by using the wrong fork." "You never could." He escorted her toward their seats. Caitlyn had turned out to be the perfect bride. He couldn't ask for a better wife, though he prayed all his brothers were successful and all threats against his family ended. But that was for another day. Right now they needed to focus on love, and what better place to be than at a wedding, next to the woman who made him happy. Life was good. Thank you for reading. I hope you enjoyed Roy and Caitlyn's romance as much as I did. Next in the series is lawyer Dylan Bentley, who's out to get revenge, but instead falls for his spying wife in Irresistibly Rugged, about the author. USA Today best-selling author, Victoria Pinder grew up in Irish Catholic Boston, then moved to Miami. Eventually, found that writing is her passion. She always wrote stories to entertain herself. Her parents are practical-minded people demanding a job, but when she sat down to see what she enjoyed doing, writing became obvious. Visit my website and download a free novel www.victoriapinder.com. Victoria at victoriapinder.com.